Greetings, everybody, and welcome to Midnight's Edge. I'm Tom Connors. With me, as always, is Andre the Boss Man, but we have a special guest with us today, and this is not our normal scheduled streaming time. As you can see, we have Razorfist with us. How are you doing, sir?
Godspeed. Thank you for having me on. I'm ready to pound out some pulp. That sounds vaguely sexual.
It does, but it's true because that's how it's made.
If it's not a double entendre before, it is now.
And it should be. So yeah, as you can tell from the title, there's been some Conan news lately, as you saw from Andre's interview last week and the news that broke. So we're going to talk a little bit about that, a little bit of Solomon Kane, a little bit of Conan, all that good stuff, maybe even some other pulp stuff since we got you here. But we're happy to have you here, and we're going to talk some fun stuff. Isn't that right, Andre?
We are indeed. So we'll be talking some Conan, we'll be talking loads and loads of Solomon Kane, and also, well, who knows what else we'll be talking about. But we are live. And everyone, since this is an unscheduled stream, it doesn't get much help in pushing it from this platform. So everyone, if you could do us a favor, smash that like, help share this stream, get the word out there. And then this is the place for all things pulp this day.
Yes.
Yes. As Bright as Day says,
disregard Marvel, embrace pulp.
Says
unless we're talking Marvel's pulp, which throughout history has been pretty good.
Has it? What are you referring to?
Well, if you go back to like your Savage Sword of Conan days and everything like that, plus the newer stuff also ain't half bad, but especially like the traditional Marvel comics. I mean, surely you must like the Marvel Solomon Kane stuff. That was Marvel. That was pulpy.
I do. No.
Yeah.
I thought you meant like they actually published prose. I'm like, what? I can't think of anything. Although they did many years ago. I don't know how you feel about Alfred Bester. Do you like old school sci-fi like that? Like The Star's My Destination or whatever?
Yeah, kind of. Generally, I do like all kinds
Alfred
of
Bester back in the
fiction.
day. Yeah, he's like one of the kind of unsung sci-fi heroes. And he used to write radio scripts, and he was a pulp writer for many years. Anyways, he did a book, really influential book called The Star's My Destination. And Marvel did it as a graphic novel, right? And this was back when nobody knew what the hell a graphic novel was. Like they just heard the words graphic novel and they were like, are you supposed to put text and then pictures on the side or something? Like, what are you supposed to do? So that's literally what they did. It's like literally lines of typewritten text with like sequential pictures on the side that Howard Chaykin did. And actually, it's like the best artwork I've ever seen from Howard Chaykin. It's awesome.
Well, that seems like an
weird,
interesting historical document.
Yeah. Sorry, random fact.
Yeah. Well, but the random facts are cool. I mean, there's nothing better than random facts. Well, of course, what's better than that is like all kinds of pulp goodness. And that's something that maybe, just maybe, we'll be getting more of in the next few years. Because, before we get into that, as Brightest Day says, rage, frackin' rage. Yeah, let's all rage about these overall pretty good news, or potentially really good news. Because as we covered last week, Cabinet Entertainment has been acquired by Funcom. Funcom, of course, being the Norwegian game developer responsible for the Age of Conan games, and also Conan Exiles more recently. They're working on this massive Dune game, so they know their stuff. And they are
Also a pulp.
Yes, let us not forget that Dune started out published in the pulp magazines of the 60s. Mm-hmm. I believe it was like in 4 issues before it was like collected and rewritten into a novel.
Yeah, and it went like that with all the sequels too.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, good times. Like it all comes back to the pulps.
It does.
But anyway, getting back to why we're talking about this then. Funcom has now legally acquired the entirety of the Robert E. Howard library, alongside character rights for Conan the Barbarian, Kull the Conqueror, Solomon Kane the Puritan, and all the other characters that came from Robert E. Howard, and that's many.
Wow. And there's some cool Western characters in there with Robert E. Howard, and There's of course what's her name? Not Red Sonja. There is a Red Sonja. There is a Robert E. Howard Red Sonja. But what? Dark Agnes.
Dark Agnes, yeah, Dark Agnes of Rogatino.
Oh man, that needs to be a movie. Dark Agnes is a great character.
I would imagine that she's going to be one they're trying to push, because they tried to push her in Marvel Comics, both now and back in the day, because they don't have the rights to Red Sonja. Because of various corporate mergers and remergers and splits and everything like that, even though she actually started out with Marvel as an adaptation of the original Red Sonja character by Howard, she's now completely separate. So I would imagine that Dark Agnes is one they're going to try to push as the replacement Red Sonja. Wouldn't surprise me in the slightest.
She's kind of like... don't think of her as like a companion character to Conan. She's almost a little more of a companion character to Solomon Kane. She's like, she's in like 1700s revolutionary France.
She's almost contemporary with Solomon Kane. She's like right there in that general bracket.
She's in France. She kind of has a flintlock pistol, if I remember correctly, and she has a saber. She's kind of a sword fighter. And there's kind of almost like a modern Joan of Arc kind of vibe to her, if I remember.
Kind of, yeah.
Really cool character, actually.
And the beauty is that now with Funcom fully in on the ownership side, with all of their resources behind them, we could be getting loads and loads of Howard goodness in the next few years. As Andrew Sabina said, Howard Cinematic Universe when? Oh my God, that would be something. I mean, if there's one cinematic universe that needs to happen, it's the Robert E. Howard historic universe, beginning with Kull the Conqueror back in the pre-cataclysmic Atlantic era, continuing through the Hyborian Age with Conan, moving up through the historic age with Bran MacMorn.
I was going to say Bran MacMorn.
Yeah. And then, of course, moving up to the 1930s and everything with like Howard's contemporary boxers, and frontiermen.
People sleep on that boxing stuff. Robert E. Howard was crazy into the pugilism. Jesus Christ!
His boxing stories are so freaking good.
They are, and you know what's also good? He was a bit of a pioneer in the horror Western genre. Like the sort of Western cowboy mixed with the supernatural sort of thing. That's a big thing now, right? Now in comic books and whatnot, you'll see it every now and then. But he was one of the guys who's really he was the tip of the spear on that.
He absolutely was. Not only that, but across the board. I mean, I can't think of any writer who was quite as ahead of his time as Robert E. Howard. I mean, the only one that comes even close, and this is for different reasons, would be Jules Verne,
right? Or maybe like
Wells,
or maybe Dumas or somebody like that. But like, it's crazy. Like he's basically the fountainhead of, maybe next to, I would put L. Frank Bauman there with regard to fantasy too. But like, as far as sword and sorcery, that's it. Like even Tolkien, from what I understand, there's some correspondence with Tolkien where he received a collection of Howard stories.
He absolutely would have been aware of Howard.
Yes, and he liked. He said he quite liked one of the stories. Like most of the style and whatever with the violence and whatnot was not entirely to his taste, but he complimented one of the stories, and I'm blanking on which one it is. But he was aware of him. There's no way you could not be aware of him.
Well, he wasn't as well or as renowned at the time, although he was getting there. So there's obviously ways, but obviously he would have been aware. Someone like Tolkien would have been very well aware of Howard's writing, and may even have drawn inspiration from just how lived in Howard's worlds were. Because one of the many things that stand out about his writing is how vibrant it is, how it feels so alive, so real. And the trick that he apparently did was that he took his own contemporary surroundings And this man is a man who knew literature. He was a true wordsmith. He knew how to play with words. He knew how to be vibrant. He knew, like, when he typed, he would read everything out loud, so he would hear how it sounded, not just through his inner ear, but through his outer ear too. Like, no, wait, that didn't come across right. Let's redo that sentence. Ah, yeah, here we go.
You can
so
tell
he would get it just right, and by applying his own lived experiences from the frontier land where he was, and applying that to different times in history, he made history come alive in a way that I don't think any other writer ever has managed to make it come alive.
Another pulp writer, a little bit later, but almost his contemporary, Michael Moorcock of the Elric series, kind of the father of the multiverse. Actually, you're welcome, Marvel Comics. He said something to the effect of he's not a big Tolkien guy, but he is a massive Robert E. Howard fan. And I forget what his exact words, but something to the effect of, like, when you're reading Howard's prose, it's like, even to this day, I mean, Michael Moorcock's well into his 70s, maybe even 80s. I think he's 70s. And he's like, even now I can sit down and read Robert E. Howard. And it's like, dear God, how did he put these words together like this way? You know what I mean? How do you even... I mean, I can still remember the Solomon Kane when he comes across the dead girl on the roadside in Red Shadows. Do you remember that? Like,
oh, yeah. Who could forget?
He just... Men shall die for this, he said coldly. That's it. Like, it's just perfect. You know what I mean? Absolutely. And it's cinematic in its own way, too.
Indeed it is. And what is so stunning then is how no one has been able to top it. In close to a century since, no one have been able to top just the kind of thing that he did. Everyone that has ventured into the realm of sword and sorcery, a genre that had to be named after what he did. Was it Michael Moorcock that came up with that name too? I don't recall the second.
Fritz Leiber, who is a very close, he's also very, very good. But yeah, Fritz Leiber was the one who named it. I think Michael Moorcock and Fritz Leiber were going back and forth trying to decide what to call it, because it wasn't.
Yeah, I knew that Moorcock was involved. He wanted another name, didn't he?
He had another name for it, and I forget what it was. Fantasy and science fiction. It was like science fantasy or something like that.
Something to that effect, because and he's not wrong, because the difference between Howard's sword and sorcery is that, unlike fantasy at large, which is like Harry Potter and Star Wars and the typical hero journey and stuff like that, there's actually a greater element of science fiction to Howard's writing. And by science fiction, I don't mean like spaceships and stuff. I mean literally, this is fiction, but it's fiction based on science. And in terms of Conan and ancient history, this is fiction. It's historic fiction based on the best sources that we have available to us. How could a possible past beyond the historic past have looked like? That was the approach, like extremely grounded approach. And then, then you have like some monsters and stuff like that in there, because that was what was required to sell it to Weird Tales magazine. But if you disregard the weird elements, most of Howard's writing is really, really grounded historic fiction.
Yeah, absolutely. I, in fact, you guys know I write pulps now, and I have the first one came out late last year, and it did really well. So there's going to be a second one, and the second one, whereas the first one was more of a crime kind of thing and a noir, the second one's a little bit more of a Robert E. Howard sword and sorcery kind of thing. And the very beginning of it, I love one of my favorite Robert E. Howard Conan story to this day is the Tower of the Elephant. And
it's so good.
The part of it that I love isn't even like when he starts getting into the plot. It's the description of the city and how like rogues peered from the shadows and all that, like drunken wenches reeled with, in the streets and all that. That entire passage there, total inspiration. I did my own like version of that kind of thing at the very beginning of my next story. So the next one's like a little more sword and sorcery. He's still inspiring people to this day. It's
That is truly awesome. Oh, on that note, I have a question for you, actually,
What's that?
because here's the thing with Robert E. Howard. During his first golden age, and the first golden age that was from like, say, the late 60s up until the early 80s, which was when you first had the Lancer
Paperbacks.
paperbacks,
Yeah.
with the Frazetta covers that really exploded.
Oh, yeah.
Then you have the Marvel comics, and those two in turn is what led to the movies. That was like the first golden age. But the funny thing is that during that time, it was almost impossible to find any writings from Howard that were original. All of these books that you see right here, these paperbacks, they weren't Howard's original writings.
Yeah, there were
It was his writings,
Camp.
but then it was diluted and expanded upon by Elsbreg the Camp. Exactly. Did you ever read Elsbreg the Camp's stories? Or have you only read Howard's original unadulterated stories? Because the irony is that now, today, thanks to Fredrik Malmberg, we all have access to the original Howard writings.
Yeah.
But at the time, during Howard's first golden age, they were close to impossible to get a hold of. I mean, the only way to get them was that either you knew Glenn Lord and you had access to the trunk with the original material and the fanzines and stuff like that, or you had the original pulps from the 30s. And if you didn't, what you had was Elsbreg the Camp's rewrites. That was it. That was what sold in the millions.
Yeah, that's true. And Elsbreg de Camp took some rather major liberties at times, and it's the writing just wasn't on par. I mean, how are you going to compare anyone to Robert E. Howard? But no, I've read little bits of it here and there. And then, if I'm not mistaken, didn't he finish some story fragments too? He may have.
He did, because what he did was that, and his approach generally is a really sound approach. So I'm not faulting his approach in any way, shape, or form, just his execution of it.
Yeah.
What he did was that he took all the fragments and he finished them, and then he wrote new stories, connective tissue to connect between the original stories. All of this is fine. And then the really bad thing was that he rewrote the original stories too. And he did this without understanding them. Because there was at one point where he actually said in public that if you're looking for subtext or meaning, don't look here. There's none of that here. This is just pure entertainment. And his writing maybe was that, but Howard's wasn't.
No.
Howard's writing is filled with layer upon layer upon layer with subtext. And he wasn't clever enough a writer to get it.
Yeah.
So then you have someone that's like really, really dumb that tries to not necessarily improve upon what the master did, but certainly expand upon it in his own way without it necessarily working. It's kind of like J.J. Abrams decided, hey, I'm going to go and try to continue what George Lucas did and try to retcon some stuff and just do it all. You see, like, it never really works out that well. I will give him credit for this, though. The good thing that came out of Elsbreg the Camp, actually, it was two things. One, we probably wouldn't know Conan today if not for him, because he's the guy that made sure we actually got the Lancer editions with those amazing Frazetta covers. That in turn led to the comics. This cover that we see right here, which is my personal all-time favorite image of Conan. It's not Frazetta, it's Earl Norrem, and it's a cover from The Savage Sword of Conan. And this story, the cover is from The Treasure of Tranikos, which is an Elsbreg the Camp rewrite. Because here's the amazing thing. Elsbreg the Camp, he wasn't that strong a writer. But Roy Thomas at Marvel, he was a strong writer. So he was able to take the stories that Sprague the Camp had kind of butchered and then make them really good in the comics.
Yeah.
So to me, the highlight of the first golden age isn't so much the original paperbacks by Sprague the Camp, but it's the comics by Roy Thomas during the same period, where he adapted Sprague the Camp's work and did it better.
Yeah, this was a common thing too. It's been a common thing over the history of pulp. It's kind of this disrespected medium. I think even Raymond Chandler, who today is considered one of the biggest, titans of the 20th century literature, basically created American detective fiction along with Dashiell Hammett. And even he said something to the effect of, that there's when you write commercial fiction, there's just people who kind of assume that there's nothing else behind it. Right. And that absolutely happened to Conan, too. It happened to Raymond Chandler, not so much to Dashiell Hammett because he had the right politics in literary circles. But like most other people, they kind of got disrespected. Walter Gibson, creator of The Shadow, was the same way. He said, I didn't write my Shadow novels to just be pulps. I wrote them to be novels. Right. And Robert E. Howard was the exact same way. So consequently, when these things were released on paperback, the same exact thing. Heck, I'm in the middle of reading a Shadow Pulp, Black Master, right now, and they abridged the living shit out of these things. They'll take things out. They remove the artwork, which is, how are you going to remove the artwork out of a pulp? What is wrong with you? And so they're constantly dicking around with them. They did the same thing to Solomon Kane too. They finished a couple of story fragments. If I remember correctly, they got Fritz Leiber, who is also one of the fathers of sword and sorcery. They got him to actually write some of the original Conan stories too, if I remember correctly. Something like that. I don't know which stories, but he wasn't very. Afterward, they interviewed him, and he was not very over the moon. He pretty much just did it for money. But I'd be interested to read those ones.
But here's the thing, though. Even if you just do it for money, if you're a good writer, that
Right.
doesn't have to be a detriment. I mean, look at all the pulp writers. They all did it for the money. They got like half a cent a word. I mean, Howard did it in no small things for the money as well. I mean, some of his weaker Conan stories, because not everyone is a home run, and some of the weaker ones, like for instance Devil in Iron, that was one that he punched out in no time, specifically because he needed money. So he knew that his editor in Weird Tales magazine, he was like, okay, he likes this. He likes the story to have this element. He likes it to hit this beat, and then he wants this kind of open ending right there. So since I'm in a rush, I don't really have a story right now in this moment, but I'm just going to go by those notes, and I'm going to punch out this story right here in no time. Also, Devil in Iron. I'm going to submit it. I'm going to get me some money, and that's what he did. And the Devil in Iron is just one of the middling Conan stories. But because he's such a skilled writer, like he knew his audience, he knew his editor, he was able to get it like submitted pretty much right away. So he got the money for it. Fawn's Foot Wraith got another cover story for Weird Tales magazine. And the fans got a Conan story that it's not the best of the bunch, but it's not the worst of the bunch either.
Yeah.
And it's still certainly up there with some of the best pulp stories. And you do that even if it was done for the money, because he's such a strong writer. He knows his stuff. He knows his trade.
Yeah, absolutely. And Robert E. Howard. Robert E. Howard at like 50% is like 110% for most writers. Let's be real. Him and Lovecraft were kind of similar in that way. They both wrote stories for money and whatnot. Maybe Lovecraft was a little more pretentious about what he was doing.
Oh, absolutely. And the fun thing is like just comparing the two in terms of philosophy, but also in writing style. I mean, was there ever two writers who were more different in terms of prose and writing style than Howard and Lovecraft?
And yet they were an influence on each other. If you get some of the Lovecraft stuff after they started their correspondence. So for people who don't know, Lovecraft and Howard corresponded via letters. They became good friends, actually. And kind of, talked about each other's work and gave each other pointers and whatnot. And you can notice as the correspondence intensifies, I forget, I mapped this out at one point, what years this took place. But you notice the Lovecraft prose starts to get more direct and a little more savage at a certain point. And it's like he's taking certain elements that he likes from Howard a little bit. And Howard, at the same time, he was still writing. I do know he was still writing Solomon Kane. And gradually, the horrors in his stories get a little more eldritch and a little more Lovecraftian, and that culminates in a story that's awesome, a really cool Solomon Kane story, one of the later ones, called The Footfalls Within, where Solomon Kane is wandering through North Africa, the Middle East kind of area, and he comes across these Middle Eastern slavers. And he just decides he sees the practice of slavery, and this Puritan Avenger, he can't stand it any longer. He has to take out these heathen bastards. And so he goes flintlock pistols blazing. He wastes a bunch of them. They finally overwhelm him, and suddenly he gets enslaved, right? And so they're going along in the little line of slaves. I'm, of course, telling it terribly, and you need to read either the comic or the book, because actually the comic adaptation is pretty good. Okay. And they're going along, and it's these rich kind of Middle Eastern slavers, and they see this tomb off to the side. Gilded entrance. It's way too tempting for him. And Solomon Kane just knows. He's got the Staff of Solomon at this point, I believe. And he knows, like, this is bad juju. This is going to be terrible. You shouldn't go near it. And, of course, they don't listen to him. They open it up, and this horrific Lovecraftian horror spills out and shreds the skin from their bones and reduces them to ash and all kinds of shit. So it gets very Lovecraft. It's cool. There was cross-pollination there between two of the great legends in pulp fiction. I love that kind of stuff.
And there's also the Bran McMahon story, Worms of the Earth, which is a full-on mythos story.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
that's awesome. Yeah.
It's brilliant the way that two so different writers actually became friends. I mean, at the time they did correspondence, and correspondence was the Twitter and the Facebook and the YouTube of the time. Like it really was, and they were corresponding. So they were kind of streaming together, like we're doing right now, and it influenced each other's work.
Right.
That was like the 1930s equivalent. And Hugo Prado says, "How about Clark Ashton Smith? He was in the Howard Lovecraft mix too. Yes, he was indeed. Another classic pulp writer, contemporary of both, and someone who knew them both." And Tom, that's Valley of the Worm. That's another story altogether, different from Worms of the Earth.
Yeah, I see that now.
But that one is really good too.
That's what happens when you have 500 things in the same folder.
Yeah, I know. So I don't blame you. I'm impressed you found that one. I also have to give some credit to Jim Sub, who is the one who wrote the contemporary run of Conan the Barbarian. Not the story that takes place in current age with the Avengers, but the Hyborian adventures, and they're actually really cool as well. And for his first big storyline, he actually built upon this story, the Valley of the Worm, and he brought Solomon Kane and Dark Agnes into the fray as well. I think he did pretty good with it.
That's a common thing. If I remember correctly, when Conan, actually should have got it here, I think, in the Solomon Kane omnibus from Marvel, when they finally crossed over, it's actually right here. Shit, I drew right to it.
Oh yeah, you know what that means? That means that's a page that you've opened quite often before.
right? You're not telling lies. But basically, they mixed a Solomon Kane story with a Conan story. That's essentially what I think it was not the Moon of Skulls, but Skulls and the Stars, the one where, very politically incorrect story. They come across the bare-breasted African vampire queen Nagari, who has a vampire cult or whatever. They essentially just dropped Conan into that story. It's great. Absolutely great.
See, that's Roy Thomas at his best, and those stories printed in the magazine Savage Sword of Conan, from the, let's see, what I think it was 1974. Yeah, 1974 up until like the early 90s.
Yeah, it was up. That's what was crazy. There's some Solomon Kane stories in here that are from the 90s.
Yeah. There are. They kept on doing them the whole time, more or less. Now, of course, it should be mentioned that from 1980 till circa 1990, Roy Thomas wasn't there. There were other writers that filled in for him. most of them or all of them great writers in their own right that did really good elsewhere. Most of them didn't do too good with their Conan and similar stories, though, with one honorable exception, and that's Chuck Dixon. Chuck Dixon knocked it out of the park. Because his stories were also brutal, and he wasn't shy about including some Lovecraftian references. I forget the name of the story, but I think it's like the 3 Deaths of Conan. I think that might be one. That in it, you even have like the chant, "Ya, ya, Cthulhu Fatagen." You have like that inside a Conan story. That's pretty badass.
That's great. That's great. Now, I seem to remember, was it Ralph Macchio? I want to give him credit if he's the good writer.
Yeah,
there was a
no, he was an editor, not a writer.
Okay, well, I think he might have written.
He may have written a story or two of Solomon Kane. That he may have.
I think he did. It was
not to be confused with the Karate Kid.
I think it was called Sword of Solomon Kane, right? So Solomon Kane, for those who don't know, is basically a Puritan avenger. He's like a heathen slayer, essentially. He's like, think the Crucible, but if he was mixed with like Batman or the Shadow or something like that. He's like if the Quaker Oats guy became the Punisher. So he essentially he comes across basically the Islamic version of himself. And it is some of the most politically incorrect dialogue I've ever seen. They're having a fist fight. They're having a fist fight back and forth. And I should flip through it or whatever because it's brilliant. It's like, Allah is a false god. Like with every punch, I can just imagine after September the 11th, this dialogue being printed in a Marvel comic. They're back and forth, just punching and declaring that each other's god is a heathen. Fucking
well, all I can say is thank you, Fredrik Malmberg, for having Dark Horse reprint that, because if they hadn't at the time when they did, then who knows what would happen later. Is that in the omnibus that you have right there?
It may be, but I do have the Dark Horse reprints too, so it's back there either way.
Yeah, because I mean, with I know not many people give Fredrik Malmberg a hard time, but without him, we wouldn't have had those reprints because Dark Horse wouldn't have gotten the Conan license in the first place, and then those out of print 70s, 80s, 90s Howard stories, they would have remained just that, out of print.
Yes.
I mean, Marvel, it may be in there, but I would be a little bit surprised if they have left that. I mean, then it's pure negligence on their part.
The specific run is in it. Yes, it is actually. It's called The Prophet. Here you go.
There you go.
The Prophet. It's right there. Basically, he encounters like a prince in the Middle East who's essentially
freedom of speech to comic.
An Islamic version of himself. Yeah, there he is, turban and all, genius. But it's good. It's really good. Very, very not politically correct.
But that's the beauty, because there you basically then have two people who are more alike than either of them ever wants to admit. They're just as fanatic, but they're fanatic for religions which are ultimately kind of the same, but they're different interpretations of them. So they're fighting really over interpretations, and it ends with like this: "Your God's a heathen," or "Look, you're the heathen," or "You're the heathen." "Your God's the demigod," or "Your God's the demigod." It's pretty hilarious, and that's the beauty, and also the Conan stories. I mean, if they had come out today, they would have been canceled a million times over.
Man. Was there a single issue where he didn't just ram some random bare-breasted chick for there wasn't a single issue where that didn't happen?
Well, there were some issues where he did 2 or 3 at the same time.
Right.
And also he's someone that never ever had any qualms about paying good coin for some fun experiences, and also this is something I was really rubbed up with Chuck Dixon, who I praised, because like in one of the stories, he's like, "No, I don't want to die like this. Like, I'll die when I have to, but not this way. I have many more fights to fight and many more women to bed." And it's not going to end like this. So,
oh man, see, this is what I'm talking about. I'm actually about to make a video about, because people, the way that superheroes have gone, we've probably watched Wolverine sob and cry about getting old more than actually slashing bad guys up in the last several years.
Well, now he cries over Cyclops leaving him and shit. But
that's right. Oh Christ. And fuck, I mean, Jesus, we've had how many scenes of Batman moping in the rain, and it's just, it's okay every now and then, but it's become like the norm now. We're in the deconstruction phase of the superhero thing. So we're deconstructing everything. And it's like, you hear it all the time. I hear it on my channel. I'm sure with you guys covering pop culture and comics all the time, you hear it, that it's like, what happened to heroes? Like actual heroes.
No, they all have to be anti-heroes now.
Exactly, just regular. And that's the hilarious thing.
And they all have to be mopey little cry boys that want to share their feelings. But there's one good thing with deconstruction. Only one.
What's that?
And that is, when you've deconstructed enough, eventually the pendulum swings the other way. And then it's a matter of reconstructing. And I'm kind of like hoping that, like what to quote a great character from Cobra Kai, like what this pussy-ass generation surely needs is the heroes of the past, the heroes of the pulp era of the 30s, because we can say that much of our subculture or genre culture is traced back to the 80s with like He-Man and Skeletor. I'm very glad that you brought this up now when I mentioned He-Man and Skeletor, because right there you have Thulsa Doom.
Timing, yeah.
And what is Thulsa Doom? Well, he's the proto Skeletor invented back in 1925 for King Kull.
Well, I mean, and you can do it
in reality. All of our modern day pop culture, it goes back to the 1910s, 20s, and 30s, the pulp era. That is the foundations upon which everything else is built.
Yes. And you can do it with superheroes too. It's obviously Batman in the Shadow. I've talked about this before, but like Batman's straight up just he's just the Shadow. He's a clowned up. Walter B. Gibson, the creator of the Shadow, called him a clowned up Shadow, right? But
well, if I may,
same thing. You could do that same thing where you put side by side, Skeletor and Thulsa Doom, or Conan and He-Man, or whatever. You could do the same damn thing with Shadow and Death's Harlequin, or and then Batman and the Joker, or whatever, right? It totally works that way with pulps. Doc Savage. Let's just say Superman took some slight inspiration from Doc Savage. He's got the Fortress of Solitude. He's the Man of Bronze instead of the Man of Steel. He's he's got the whole thing going on. And Batman took his utility belt from Doc Savage. And it goes on and on. But the cool thing about these characters is it sucks that there are long periods of time where we haven't had media about these characters, although Conan is kept pretty vivacious over the years. But not all of them have been that way. There's been dry spells for Doc Savage. There's been dry spells for the Phantom, dry spells for the Shadow, whatever. But the cool thing about that is being left alone, you kind of get a chance to miss them. And when they come back, it's like, it's this great contrast between what you have now. And I'm hoping that happens. That's the video I want to make, is just, if those are the kind of heroes you're looking for, look no further. Some of these stories now are free. Zorro is public domain. Zorro's free to read. Zorro's awesome, right? And
Zorro is also one of the proto-Batmans. Like what I always say is that if to deconstruct Batman, really deconstruct Batman, he's 2/5 the Shadow, 1/3 the Phantom, and 1/3 Zorro. I mean, those are the core elements. Those three characters together with different combinations is what made up Batman. Without those three, one of those three being invented first, you wouldn't have had Batman. Simple as that. Because he has elements from all of them. And they even admitted it. I mean, Bob Kane and Bill Finger have independently of each other. I don't know about the Shadow. I mean, that's obvious. But both of them independently of each other admitted to being inspired by Zorro. And
well, it goes a little. See, I'm actually incredulous. Yeah, I'm actually incredulous about the Zorro thing, and here's why. The first Batman story, for those who don't know, it's called The Case of the Chemical Syndicate. It's the first ever Batman yarn or whatever. And the plot is that there's two partners who own a chemical company, and one of them wants it, and they try to kill the other and whatever. It's a pretty basic mystery. It's stolen lock, stock, and barrel from the Shadow pulp called
Absolutely it is.
Apparel.
Absolutely it is. I mean, there was a more heavy theft from the Shadow.
Yeah.
But like, for instance, this dynamic between Batman and Bruce Wayne, and the difference between this two, both Bill Finger and Bob Kane, independently of each other, says, "Oh, that's Zorro. That's total Zorro. We took it."
Well,
from
yeah,
there.
but
even the Bat Cave is something that Bill Finger said, "Oh, we took that from the Zorro cave."
Well, yeah, but hear me out. And I love Zorro. I think he's a huge influence on a lot of characters. I suspect he's the swashbuckling element, at least, of that character might have been part of the inspiration for Solomon Kane, maybe even, but because he came a little bit later after Zorro. And I think Zorro's been an inspiration for a lot of superheroes, and maybe certain elements of Batman are. But I think Zorro's a little more of a cover story, and here's why: because their story has always been, oh, we went and watched the what's the Douglas Fairbanks Zorro movie? Is it the Gay Blade?
The Mark of Zorro.
The Mark of there were two Mark of Zorros. There's one that was
it's a 1940 and the 1920, which is the original.
Right. So it was showing that the Douglas Fairbanks Zorro was showing or whatever. And that inspired us to do Batman. The problem is that version of Zorro is not Batman or anything like the version of Batman that was introduced. He's kind of happy. He's sort of jibing and joking. His costume wasn't even all black. He barely wears his hat. He barely wears a cape. And totally different character. The one that's most like it is the Tyrone Power one from 1940, but that's a year later. Right?
20 years later, that's 1940. So that came out after the invention of Batman. No, specifically, it's not Tyrone Power who we see on screen right here. It's the 1920. But and also not just that, but also the original story as it was written, because that was quite influential pulp story as well.
Yeah, and it's free too. You guys should go check it out.
From Johnston McCauley. It was renamed the Mark of Zorro. After the movie, but the original title was The Curse of Capistrano, released in 5 installments, and it's magnificent.
It is. It holds up. It's a good story. The Curse of Capistrano refers to Zorro too. So I mean, Mark of Zorro kind of.
Yeah. I just really like that title, but obviously all of that went into Batman. But of course, if there's one character that was ripped off more than any other for Batman, it's obviously the Shadow. That's
they even traced. I don't know if you're aware, they even traced the artwork from that pulp.
I wouldn't be surprised.
You a Batman, yeah, and it's.
I mean, they traced the Batman and the artwork for that, like He-Man did for Conan.
Yeah, and they swiped some characters. They swiped later stories. There's a later pulp called Judge Lawless, a Batman story with transparently 1-to-1, a copy of that where there was a corrupt judge. I forget what the name of it was, but they copied that pulp. And Commissioner James Gordon. I don't know how many people are aware of this. I'm going to grab this.
Go for it.
This is a character. This is a kind of a forgotten pulp character called the Whisperer. And this guy is Police Commissioner James Gordon, the Whisperer. They stole this character, lock, stock, and barrel. Bob Kane and Bill Finger did. That's
a very nice book, by the way.
Oh, it's awesome. It's such a cool character. He's basically a quiet shadow is the easy way to describe him. He's the police commissioner, but he knows like the law is so corrupt, he can't make it work essentially. So he has a dual identity as the Whisperer. And what complicates matters is the Whisperer then as a vigilante becomes public enemy number 1. So he technically has to hunt himself, but he's basically the Shadow with silencers on his pistols. And instead of laughing, he's sort of whispers at his enemies like eerily and whatnot. So he's a cool character actually, but he didn't last that long, unfortunately.
Yeah, no, that's the thing. Like most pulp characters, they kind of stayed in the pulp era. Only some endured. But here's the beauty, that only some have to endure to keep the entirety of the genre alive.
Yeah. And that's the interesting thing. Like, people will think we're like, go back to this old stuff. And it's like, most of this stuff didn't go away. Most of this stuff is still around.
Yeah, as I said, like this is the foundations upon which our entire subculture is built. But or not even subculture, but like a popular entertainment culture. And I mean, these are the foundations. And now that we have, I would say, lost our way. And I really think that's the case. When we mentioned all of the deconstruction going on, it's just deconstruction upon deconstruction upon deconstruction. Well, you have to find your way back again, and to me, that's not literally go back to the 30s, but certainly look to that for inspiration, because they nailed it. They got the formula down to the point where it became the foundation. It's the foundation for a reason. So I would say go and look to that for inspiration. You've now deconstructed enough. Go down to the core elements now. Look at the bricks that make up the foundation.
Something you have to understand is, like, to drive home how it's still kind of with us. Well, first off, obviously, the Shadow started in radio. Did you see the announcement just this past week? Batman's going to have a radio drama, basically.
I saw. I was like thinking, well, that's amazing, brilliant. Welcome.
And they're doing it old-timey. They're doing it kind of old-timey too,
which is really cool.
Yeah, it's neat. One last ripoff from the Shadow.
I mean, why change what works?
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. Actually, it looks pretty cool. But yeah,
I don't mind ripping off things that work. I mean, Skeletor is like the most coolest villain ever, and he's a total ripoff of Thoughts of Doom. So hey, go for it.
If it works out, maybe we could get a new Shadow radio drama. That'd be kind of.
That would be something. That would be sweet.
Speaking of radio dramas, just a selfless plug here for a moment. A couple weeks ago, we did the 1983 script read of the Batman that was kind of like a radio drama. So there you go. Check that out on Midnight's Edge After Dark. So.
Did you guys check out my radio recreation of the Shadow? I did 2 episodes.
I know you were doing them. I haven't got a chance to listen to them yet, but I remember you talking about them.
The cool thing about them is they're lost scripts, so they're not episodes that have survived. So there's no recorded copies of them. We just had the scripts. So basically it's the only way you can hear the episodes. And it's one that was written. I just mentioned Alfred E. Bester earlier today, right? With Stars My Destination. He wrote for the Shadow for a while, and he, what's the name of the DC Comics character who's like a Cro-Magnon man who survives a Holocaust and he becomes a super genius and survives through time. He's a Batman villain. Vandal Savage. Is it Vandal?
Savage sounds familiar, yeah.
Anyways.
I think I know who you're talking about, yeah.
In this Shadow
Vandal Savage? Okay, I'm not entirely sure, but yeah, it sounds familiar.
In this Shadow script, he basically, Alfred E. Bester, who also created that character, he basically prototyped this character in that Shadow episode. So it's called The Immortal Murderer. And then there was another one called Danger in the Dark that I did, but they're both episodes that that haven't survived. So we recorded that with a full voice cast, and the Razor Force helped me out. My fans were also voice actors in it.
Nice.
Pretty awesome.
You've done quite a few Solomon Kane readings too, have you not?
The Right Hand of Doom. I did it for Halloween last year, which I love that story. It's such a good little like horror story about a necromancer's hand. But I that was the one that hooked me on Solomon Kane when I first read it, if I remember correctly. But
at the time, when you read this story, were you already familiar with Hellboy, which famously ripped off the title, Right Hand of Doom?
They sure did. And to make matters worse, Mike Mignola illustrated that Prophet story is illustrated by Mike Mignola, Solomon Kane. So he knew what he was ripping off too.
He has no excuse. I mean, he illustrated the original story.
He ripped it off, but I forgive him. He illustrated some good
I
Korra
believe
comics.
the word is homage in that particular case.
No. In the immortal words of Liam Neeson in the Deadpool, it's a homage.
Yeah, exactly.
But
Oh, there's a deep cut. Dirty Harry 5. Jesus.
Right.
Welcome
Hey, I did
to
Dirty
the
Harry
jungle.
month, motherfucker.
I love Dirty Harry. I want a new one where that like the last where they drag him out of retirement.
Dude,
Like,
he's punching people in his last movie.
I know.
He's like 9,000 years old. He's like 80% dust, and he's still punching people.
He's still tougher than most of us. Here, Mr. Eastwood. Keep going.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and the funny thing is that Unforgiven, I saw like a publication point this out just to go back to Eastwood, because like again, he's like also someone that in a sense is from this pulpy genre, because the spaghetti westerns, they were the movie equivalent of the written pulp stories. I mean, like for instance, the western stories that Howard wrote, they might as well have been the script for the Italian spaghetti westerns.
A lot of those one character spaghetti western, the ones that were named after the character, those series like Django and Hallelujah and Sartana and stuff like that, they'd have like kind of magical, almost supernatural powers in a way. Sartana will just appear behind you and he could do crazy card tricks, and that kind of stuff is pure pulp. They're like looking at Mandrake the Magician and stuff like that. Totally. There's no way they're not. So yeah, you're totally dead on there. In fact, I'm pretty sure they were probably inspired by some pulp characters when they made those.
Oh, absolutely. And they would have been aware of them. I mean, in Italy, they even made their own Phantom comics when they could no longer get them during World War II and stuff. So you have like, you have during World War II and in the aftermath of it, they even did like their pirated Phantom comics that they released officially that weren't officially endorsed by Lee Falk, which only goes to show that the pulp influence was great. So obviously they knew of it.
Yeah.
And the funny thing, though.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, like, the funny thing, though, with taking it back to Clint Eastwood, who was, like, the perfect embodiment of that kind of, like, pulpy hero. Consider this, that in the 90s, when Unforgiven came out, those movies, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, and all of those Sergio Leone classics, they seemed like they were so unbelievably old. That was part of prehistory. Well, the distance in time between his most recent Western, which came out just now, and Unforgiven is greater than the distance in time between the Unforgiven and his spaghetti Westerns.
Some of that's got to be...
put things into context.
Oh, yeah. And I think DVD and Blu-ray and streaming made a big difference in that, too. Is now these movies are more in our consciousness. You remember what a big deal it was back in like the 80s and 90s when Disney would say, we're going to release an old movie on VHS. It was like,
we're going to take it out of the vault. I mean, it was like, oh, run by. It's out of the vault. So get it now, because it's not coming out for who the hell knows. Maybe never again.
Right. Those things seem self-congratulatory in retrospect. Like we should just drop Trow and blow them right there. But it was great marketing, though. Yeah, right. It was actually an event. It was hard to get a hold of these movies. So yeah, they seemed older than that. There was a time when the idea of watching, I mean, the Sergio Leone ones, probably not so much because they played on TV sometimes, but like nobody knew about the Corbucci movies. Or you couldn't even get Django in the UK for a long time. I remember that. Django, which is now big because of Django Unchained, the only way for a long time that the UK censors had banned it when it came out because it was too violent.
I actually just watched that like 2 weeks ago.
The original?
Yeah, with the one with the casket and the...
damn good. So good. Yeah. But... there's some famous movie in the UK, and I'm sorry, people in the UK, I don't know the name of the movie, but there was this scene in it. It's a very famous movie, but there's this scene in it where they literally are just watching Django with with the fucking minigun, just mowing down shitloads of Southern troops and whatnot. And for the longest time, that was the only way you could watch Django in the UK, unless you got some pirated film reel or something. Like, that's absolutely crazy to think about. But it's totally changed since then. I think that's one of the reasons why. Like, it seems like it was way longer, or it seemed like it was way longer back then. But I just hope, like, whenever pulp characters come out, I just hope we're kind of over this deconstruction phase by then. Because I'm not going to lie, I'm a little leery of an adaptation of like a Puritan Avenger in 2021. You know what I mean? Like, I'm afraid they'll have him swear in fealty to the Church of the Flying Spaghetti Monster, or they'll put purple streaks in his hair or paint his fingernails or some shit. I'm not interested in that at all, personally.
Well, I think in some sense, we lucked out that we got our one Solomon Kane movie back in 2009, before any of this real deconstruction thing begun.
Yeah, he barely slid in under the wire there, and thank God, because I like that movie. I know a lot of people have issues with it, but I love that movie.
Yeah, I love it too. And we got a super chat about it. I'm going to bring that one up right now, and we can talk about that one movie. We have more super chats. We're going to get through every single one of them because we never leave any super chats behind. Unlike, I'm not even going to go there. So, yeah. But I'm just going to find this one. It was Kung Fu Hot Dog who said for £2 Solomon Kane film with James Purefoy. Have you seen? And Razorfist. Have you seen the movie that we're seeing is still from right here? Solomon Kane with James Purefoy. What do you think about it?
Yeah, I was talking to, there's this girl I used to talk to, and we were talking about Conan somehow. And she was like, have you watched Solomon Kane? They just came out with a movie. He's like Robert E. Howard's original hit character. And I'm like, I've never even heard of this character before. And so I watched the movie. And it's the movie that introduced me to Solomon Kane. So yes, not only did I watch it, I absolutely love it. Having read the pulp stories, I get some of people's criticisms with it, but I kind of take it as it's a prehistory. It was a moment in time, and maybe we're still in this time, where when you come out with a movie from a character that maybe not everybody is familiar with, you have to tell the origin story, which kind of sucks for pulp characters, because half the fun of pulp is that a lot of times you're just dropped into like the story, the character, the shadow. Hell, they didn't even explain who the hell he was for like almost 20 years, right? They strung that out forever. And Solomon Kane, they never fully explained who he was. They had that little poem about Solomon Kane as an old man, kind of relaying stories from
Homecoming is what you're referring to.
Yes, thank you. And they even adapted that to a comic. It was really good too, by Al Williamson. His art in that is incredible. But they never fully laid it out. Like, here's what he was doing at this time. We know vaguely he was like in the Navy at some point. He sailed under somebody's command, didn't like what was going on, kind of moved away from that. And we know certain little things about him, but that's half the fun. But the movie, it's 2009. We got to tell the origin story. So they had to make up an origin story. It is what it is, but it's fun. Once he turns into Solomon Kane and he starts, like, when he's wasting those two hoods in that cave in his full regalia, that's just badass. That's pure Solomon Kane right there. And then it's sad because we only really get the true character at the tail end of the movie, when he's doing that ending monologue and he's like paying his respects at the tombstone and he's riding away. There was a time, an age of witchcraft and sorcery, when no one stood against evil. That time is over. That was pure Solomon Kane right there. And then the movie's over. So it made you want a sequel, and then the sequels never got made.
Yeah, that's unfortunate. Now, the problem with actually, there's two issues with that. One is that, as you say, this was 2011, meaning the movie was greenlit around 2007, 2008, thereabouts, meaning it was hot on the heels of Casino Royale and Batman Begins. And that means that every studio in town, every film production company, whether it be independent or studio affiliated, they had like one clear mandate. And that is that in order to fund this, It has to be an origin story. We can't do any in media res, as our good friend Erik Ronge Madsen pointed out, is the Latin name for just getting straight into the story.
Right.
There has to be an origin story, because that was Casino Royale did, that was Batman Begins did, and they were both huge hits. I mean, Batman Begins wasn't that big a hit, but The Dark Knight was that big a hit, and they attributed that to Batman Begins. So what you are going to do, and this was true across the board, is that you are first going to give us a Batman Begins, in this case a Solomon Kane Begins, and when you have done that, then you can give us the real story that you wanted to tell right away in movie number 2. Well, then that's going to be a huge hit, and that is our absolute condition for filming it. But Solomon Kane doesn't have an origin. Don't care. Give us an origin.
Wow.
But there's none written. Well, make something up, and that's exactly what they did. But I will say, though, that the filmmakers, they did a really, really good job in crafting a really entertaining story that was true to the stories to come in making that origin. I also have to say that James Purefoy, my God, how good was he?
Dude,
After seeing that movie, and when you've already seen Van Helsing, and what is Van Helsing? It's a Solomon Kane ripoff.
Totally.
I mean, Solomon Kane has been ripped off in video games. He's been ripped off on film. And finally, he got like his own movie then in 2009. But after then seeing James Purefoy in that role, that's when you recognize exactly how wasted Hugh Jackman was and what a copycat he was.
Yeah,
compared
absolutely.
To
and it's
Purefoy,
tough too, because didn't they cut down on how often he wears his hat in that movie too because of Van Helsing, correct?
Yes.
They literally were trying not to be compared to Van Helsing, which
and the problem is that and Van Helsing, what frustrated me is that you're obviously making a Solomon Kane movie here. So why the hell do you call it Van Helsing? I mean, just freaking get the license to Solomon Kane. It's not that expensive, and then do Solomon Kane proper instead of this bullshit.
Yeah,
God, I hated that movie. But anyway, and also just to comment on how good James Purefoy is, he's one of the actors that I never ever remember the name of. And it's the same thing with my wife. We both saw him in Solomon Kane. We had already seen him in Rome. So we knew him. He's amazing in Rome. We knew him from there. We've seen him in other things and stuff like that since. But so remember, this is an actor that we knew of before. Then he played Solomon Kane. He was so good in that whenever me and my wife we see him in a later thing, we don't recall his name because it's difficult. It's like Solomon Kane is in it.
Right, exactly.
So that's what. So we just call the actor James Purefoy now Solomon Kane whenever he's there. It's like, oh, who's in it? Oh, Solomon Kane is in it.
Here's how awesome he was during the action scenes. I saw this in the interviews and the press junket that they were doing. And when they were filming the action scenes to get the adrenaline up, James Purefoy was like, we need some good ambiance here. And it's like, well, we don't have the score ready or whatever. We don't have the music yet. He's like, put on Motorhead Ace of Spades. So if you imagine the fight scenes in that movie with Motorhead playing on top, that's literally what they were doing.
That's a fun edit waiting to happen.
Right. Totally. It's genius. But if I'm telling you, man, I know that we're talking about doing a TV show, and that it's apparently kind of in earlier development.
Yes, that's true. This is something that we actually broke, and we learned this directly from Fredrik Malmberg of now of Funcom, and was it Heroic Signatures? Is the new studio division that is heading up all things Robert E. Howard.
Yeah, and I'll just
they
say,
are internally developing Solomon Kane.
Right. Okay. Well, if they're doing the TV show, I'm telling you, they shouldn't count James Purefoy out, even though he's older, because Solomon Kane grizzled is even better. So I'm telling them, like, don't count him out. You don't necessarily have to cast younger. The older and craggier he gets, the better he's going to be.
Exactly. No, I agree completely. I mean, there are some characters or some actors that were so good with certain characters that you just want to see them come back. I mean, Carl Urban is Dredd, that's one, and James Purefoy is Solomon Kane, that's another one. so good. Like, no recasting necessary.
No.
He's older now, but that actually is a benefit to the character. Oh, you can like keep it halfway canon, or pretend that the previous one is canon. Make it so that you don't actually have to say it, because it legally can't be, because it's not owned by them. I mean, the movie is owned by Constantine Films, but still, you can do like this kind of like pretend quasi thing that doesn't have to preclude it, so that the fans can't see the movie that already is there as the origin story. Just continue from the promise. It's now 10 years later, and Solomon Kane has been traveling the world, and then we pick up with the story in Africa. Like, I'm not saying that they're doing that. That's just like, that's my dream way of doing it. And then, of course, it's entirely up to them what they do.
Well, that was the plan originally. That's likely, at least, because I remember the original filmmaker, I forget the guy's name, was talking about that on the press tour. He was like, we've got a whole script and stuff ready for Solomon Kane going to darkest Africa, going to the dark continent and wasting heathens and monsters and whatnot. And that's the Solomon Kane movie right there. You know what I mean? That's where we should have started, frankly. But that's what I was waiting on. But so apparently they literally have, so they're literally working on the Solomon Kane and Conan and even Kull. I was interested in seeing they actually name dropped Kull in that announcement, which I thought was interesting.
They didn't say for what though. And Kull, to me, we'll get into Kull in 1 second here, but first I want to say in the announcement they didn't say specifically exactly what they are doing with Kull. Whether that be a movie, TV series, game. I would imagine game.
Yeah.
I would imagine that they're doing some kind of guest there. But for those that aren't aware, Kull is the character that was the predecessor to Conan.
Yeah.
He is the first barbarian that went to usurp the throne of a civilized kingdom.
Yeah.
And the first Conan story is actually a rewritten King Kull story.
Yeah.
Because Robert E. Howard, he had written a story called By This Axe I Rule, which is a King Kull story about a coup attempt at him. And this was rejected. It didn't have all the proper elements. And at the same time, Howard was working on a new character. He had like this idea for Conan, which was going to be like Kull, only 1,000,000 times better, much more interesting character. And then just to start, he did it a little bit easy. He took an easy beginning. So instead of writing a complete original Conan story, the very first Conan story is actually a rewritten Kull story. So then the story By This Axe I Rule became the Phoenix on the Sword.
Yeah, and that's why the filmmakers in the 80s who made the Schwarzenegger movie had the license to basically give Conan Kull's origin.
Yes,
in that movie. So
because it was Kull who was the slave and the gladiator and stuff like that, not Conan.
Yes,
and since they had license, that's also why they used a villain, Thulsa Doom, who is a Kull villain, not a Conan villain, because they could mix and match a little bit like that. And they did make a great Conan, or great movie. It's not a great Conan movie, but it's a great movie. But I will say, I would love for them to do a new adaptation of Kull, not just to get Thulsa Doom right on screen, but to get the Shadow Kingdom done right. Because of all of Howard's stories, to me, the Shadow Kingdom is perhaps the single most profound. Have you read the Shadow Kingdom?
I've not, no.
The Shadow Kingdom is one of the single most underrated stories ever written, in my opinion. I highly recommend that everyone who is watching right now, all 629 of you, to first smash that like, share the stream, but then read The Shadow Kingdom. Because here's the thing with Kull. Kull himself is not that interesting a character.
Mm.
Kull was improved 1,000,000 times over in Conan, but not his stories. I mean, the two stories in particular, which is the Cat and the Skull, which is where Thulsa Doom was introduced, but the Shadow Kingdom, that, my God, what a story. There are so many layers to it. That is a story that is so filled with layer upon layer upon layer. If you read it, your jaw will freaking drop. Razorfist, you have to read that story.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to check it out. It's a Kull story, correct?
Because this is the story. What happens here is basically Kull is a barbarian from a foreign land, and he has just usurped the throne of the biggest kingdom of his world. So he is this outsider that is suddenly sitting on the throne. And you have then the establishment. They are completely against this. They're plotting against him. This is a recurring theme.
Right.
But these plots, they go deeper and deeper and deeper than anyone ever
I
imagined.
I remember now. It was Michael Moorcock's inspiration for Elric and Melna Benet.
I'm sure this is something that has inspired many, 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 many things far beyond Michael Moorcock.
Well, yeah, what I'm saying is, for those who don't know, when Elric was made, also a pulp character, he was told, he was told by his editor something like, write something like Conan. That's what he was told. And he was a Robert E. Howard fan, so he didn't consider that an insult, but he was like, well, Robert E. Howard exists. I'm not going to insult him by copying him. So I'll make the anti-Conan. So instead of being big and burly, he's thin and waifish. And instead of, having all these extraordinary physical abilities, he's like got a parasitic relationship with this soul-sucking sword that he requires to survive, and drugs and whatnot. And instead of becoming a king, he starts out as a king and then loses his throne through the conspiracy. You can see how the inspiration here was there with Kull and Conan.
Absolutely. Yeah. And then going in with losing the throne, because then you have an establishment that is desperate for Kull to lose his throne.
Yeah.
But they want to do this in much more insidious ways than just like slitting his throat. That's later. That's by this Aksai rule. This story, he is alerted by other enemies, by his traditional enemies, people that hate his people, that he has a blood feud with. But they alert him, dude, we have a united enemy here. We may not like each other, but there's a bigger game being played here. And they give him a person to help him out, because he's going to need all the help he can get. And they can't reveal the truth to him right away, because he'll never ever believe it. But they do give him a key phrase that is to protect him. And then later he has to discover on his own that his loyal staff have been replaced by doppelgangers.
Right.
And they are trying to replace him with the doppelganger. Just like all the previous kings have also been replaced by doppelgangers. And who's really calling the shot? It's evil, shape-shifting, kitten-eating reptilians, snake men, who are behind it all.
Which
and
could
this
never happen in real life. No, I'm just kidding.
And this is the very, very first mention of this kind of plotline in fiction anywhere.
Somewhere,
David Icke is talking warmly about stuff like this, but this is the very, very first iteration of it. Now, I'm not saying that this has happened, but here I'm saying that there's deeper layers. There's layers even below that. So it's not like the revelation that they're snake men. That's like, and they're trying to replace him with a snake man to influence him and everything. Yeah. But it's the hidden layers of meaning that goes even beyond that, which in my opinion is why the Shadow Kingdom is one of the most profound tales ever written. And it's one of the most anti-establishment tales ever written. And that is a story that this day and age, you could never do it. But if you could do that story, you could do it justice in a miniseries with the proper build-up and everything. I mean, you have to read the story. You'll be blown away by it.
Oh, I don't doubt it. I haven't read anything from Robert E. Howard that I detested. I've read a thing here and there that felt like a bit of a holding pattern.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean,
nothing terrible.
But this one is it's a league of its own.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that sounds great. They should really release an audiobook version of that, narrated by Alex Jones, and they should call it the Shadow People Kingdom.
That would be something. That would be something. There is a really, really good audiobook version of it, because they made audiobooks of the or audiobook versions of the Del Rey editions, and Del Rey also released a complete Kull. So this story is there, but yeah, having David Icke or Alex Jones read that would kind of be hilarious. But still, but just ignore that element of it. It's all of the other deeper layers of subversion, of manipulation, of control, of trying to fight against a system that is really set against you. That is the profound element of this story. And I almost can't believe that this story was written in 1925.
I can, given what was going on in the world at that time. Yeah, God.
Well, clearly, and also I'm like thinking that like this whole trope of like reptilians or snake men, this is the first known example of it. But it makes me wonder if Howard, in his extensive library, must have had access to some older stories that maybe have been lost to us since then. Wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah, who knows? His inspirations were so varied. Like a lot of people don't realize.
All right, Rambam. You just like when I said 1925, I stand corrected. Rambam says it was written in 1927, but only published in 1929. Yeah, but still doesn't really change anything.
Yeah, really doesn't.
I mean, because it's still a really profound story, even if it was written in 1927 rather than 1929.
Yeah, that sounds great. I'm gonna have to check that out. I don't have the Kull Del Rey editions. I have all of the Conan stuff. Of course, I have the Solomon Kane volume. It makes you wish there was more Solomon Kane stuff, because it's only one.
Yeah, really. The problem, the only thing with reading his complete collections is when you read them all, you wish there were more.
Yep. And they read so fast too. That's another thing. We've been talking about pulps this whole time. We haven't really talked about what like benefits the format has. People think like pulp is some weird obscure thing. It's just short stories. That's all it is. It's short stories with short chapters that are always plot driven and not so much introspective, doubting yourself,
And it's good. I prefer that. Yeah. Because I just recently finished reading the Dune Machine Crusade trilogy, not by Frank Herbert, but by Brian Herbert and Kevin J. Anderson. And I will say that it's not nearly as good as anything Frank Herbert wrote, obviously. Mm-hmm. It's still very good. It would be a very, very good fit for a TV series. I think all the seasons are laid out there. But reading those 3 books, or rather listening to the audio tapes, because that's what I did, I'm not denying that. But still, they just went on and on and on and on and never freaking stopped. I have one complaint with them, and that's that they were too long. And I know that there's like fans for that and everything, but they were just... The story was good, but they were meandering. There were too many characters, and they just went on forever.
That's a common
indulgence. When they reached like a conclusion or like an end climax, it was no longer than the end climax of a Pulp story of like 10 pages.
Yeah, absolutely. It's
same length of climax.
You see it not just in books, but in movies and what. I mean, look, we got the Dune movie out. It's kind of like even the last Dune movie was like this. The book is kind of long. Like I remember reading it in high school and thinking Dune was like, okay, at times, get to the point. even though it is based on a pulp. It was like serialized, but I think, wasn't it slightly rewritten when it was brought to novel, kind of like a lot of pulps are, where he kind of reworked it a little bit so that it could be like fit completely in a novel, Frank Herbert? But
Yeah,
way,
he did. He did rework them because the stories that are in the books aren't exactly as the original pulp stories.
yeah,
They're rewritten and they're expanded upon and they're made much, much longer.
yeah.
So if you were to read the original pulp stories and a collection of those, it would be quite different and much, much shorter. I mean, basically, like as far as I know, I'm not an expert here, but I think, like, yeah, he printed the original for the first book. That was kind of like the proof of concept, was putting it out in the pulps at the time. And later on, it was, yeah, okay, fine. These are like first drafts that I'm just going to put here for some extra money while I work on these gigantic phone books that the full stories are going to be.
Exactly.
With the exception of the Dune Messiah, which is like a pretty little thing, thin thing, but beyond those, they're all phone books. And Brian Herbert and Kevin J. Anderson, I mean, they got the phone book thing nailed down. Like, honestly, as I was reading it, I was like impressed with two things. One is that how they had planned out everything, because they're obviously plotters. There was no spontaneity or anything like that. You could totally tell that everything here is like planned out. Nothing is organic in that sense. It's like it's fine, but it doesn't come from the characters. Always driven by story, and everything has been plotted out, and then they've just like written it. The first draft, everything must be, because there's no other way. Humans can write that freaking many pages.
Right, exactly. And I would, again, that's what I like about pulp in general, and some of the entertainment based off of pulps, which was like, it's no coincidence a lot of the pulp characters turned into serial characters, you know, like in the early, you know, the little 15-minute serials that would run before movies or whatever, like the Phantom, and even Batman got one. But like, it's no coincidence, because it's a punchier, quicker kind of medium. It doesn't waste time, and it doesn't linger too long on sobbing about your cruel fate and whatnot. If it's time to have someone pour out a monologue, the monologue is going to have to do with the plot. And Robert E. Howard does that. There's characters who deliver these lengthy, you know, Shakespearean soliloquies, but it always has to do with the plot. I remember the end of one of the Solomon Kane stories. He launches into what is essentially a sermon. He's standing over a mountain with some girl he's just rescued, and he's like, one day God will send a righteous rain to wash this creation clean, and all this, right? But it's not about sitting there and hand wringing and am I really the bad guy? Am I actually? It's like, especially when the ideas nowadays are not that profound anyway. Like, if we have to examine one more goddamn time how Batman is the real face and Bruce Wayne is the mask, like, fucking genius. Holy shit, that was so original in 1940. Actually, like, that's the thing. The Shadow already did that, right? The Shadow has a million different faces. The only consistent one is the Shadow. That's the only one. They're not even entirely sure if he's Kent Allard, right? So you just get tired of people sitting there and examining it when you could just get to the plot and have them exist for the sake of the story. That
comes with the deconstruction thing, yeah.
Absolutely, which we are balls deep in. We are balls deep in with the film, certainly. Right? We've got Joker and whatever, which was definitely a deconstruction. Logan,
well, a lot of it comes from
making
Snyder
any comment.
and stuff.
Yeah, I'm not making any comment about the quality of the movies. These are still good movies, but you know, it's just one after another after another. It's deconstructing the concept essentially.
Absolutely, yeah. And I hope we get past it soon, because it's been going on for way too long. I mean, Watchmen was already a bit too early for the curve when that adaptation came out.
Yeah, that was too early, because that is the thing that we should be getting right now when we are in the middle of deconstructing.
Exactly.
The problem with Watchmen was that in some sense it was ahead of its time. It was deconstructing before you did deconstruction, and that's, I think, a big part of the reason why it didn't perform that well. I mean, audiences, they came and they expected the next Avengers, X-Men type of movie, not the deconstruction of one, and that's what they got.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, you see these phases. I've already talked about it in like video form, where you kind of have the different phases going on. If we hold true, we're probably going to have a nice little period here of deconstruction, and then we're going to head towards sort of the latter years where
I'm
you
hoping
just exploitative stuff, and then it kind of peters out.
I'm hoping things like Dune and stuff will start to get people away from a lot of this stuff, and then
Hopefully,
and then if Frederick has enough success with things like Conan and Solomon Kane, that'll also kind of usher in a new sword and sorcery, sand and sandals kind of,
we're
more fantasy
overdue for
element.
another.
Yes,
we're overdue for a fantasy wave,
very
right?
much so.
Because we had Lord of the Rings, and then
20
Aragon
years
killed
ago.
that.
Yep.
It was almost a fantasy trend, and then Aragon just killed that dead. It was just done after Aragon flopped. But it was like, for a minute there, oh my God, we can make fantasy films again because look how successful Lord of the Rings was. And then King Arthur happened, and Aragon, and some terrible movies.
It's funny, like that happened before. I mean, the sword and sorcery genre was like big in the 80s too.
Yeah.
And then Red Sonja happened.
Oh, isn't that a shame? Isn't that a shame? Because you got some good stuff in there.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, the potential was there, but the problem was that the bad just it outdid the good, and then it doesn't really help. And then it came on the heels of many other subpar Conan ripoffs, and then suddenly audiences just moved on.
The same thing happened with just the regular 80s fantasy movies, right? You had the one that was successful, which was Dark Crystal, and then hot on its heels, you had Labyrinth, flop, Return to Oz, flop. You had a number of others too. Wasn't Willow a flop too?
Not really, but it didn't live up to George Lucas's expectations, so he never continued it. But actually, that's a big misconception. It actually did fairly well at the box office.
Interesting. Yeah. I mean, and some of them did okay. Never Ending Story obviously got a sequel, so the first one must have done well. But it was like that thing kind of came and went. You just see this in Hollywood every now and then. But for some reason, we got Lord of the Rings, which record-breaking success. And then we didn't get another big wave of fantasy until the Hobbit movies came out, which is what it is.
Which, and that was the beginning and the end of that wave right there. So,
right.
Pretty much. I mean, that was
I have to say,
and
I have to say, the worst theatrical experience I ever had in my life was seeing The Hobbit in 48 frames per second.
Really?
Yeah. I absolutely hated it. And it wasn't the movie. It was the 48 frames per second.
Yeah, I dislike that 48 and 60 frames per second. I saw some of Gemini Man in that 60 frames per second. I'm like, this looks like a fucking soap opera.
Yeah, exactly. And I will say, and after that, I swore that if I ever watch this movie again, it's not going to be on 48 frames per second. It's not going to be in 3D. It's not going to be in 1080p. Hell, it's not going to be on DVD. I'll watch it on VHS just to be sure. Not to have an experience like that.
Well, that's what drives me nuts when I walk into like a Walmart or somebody's house who has not fixed their television and they still got that smooth motion crap on it. It's like, turn it off. It is not how it's supposed to look. Your TV is artificially creating frames between the frames, so it doesn't. Right. It's killing the blur.
Fuck it. I'm going to watch it on daguerreotype. This is happening.
Or the ones where people are like, oh, I fixed the special effects where they take like the stop motion effects from RoboCop and they take out the motion blur that Phil Tippett meticulously put in for a reason.
Or whatever the hell George Lucas did to THX 1138. What the fuck was that?
Oh, Lord knows. No, but like, yeah, like they don't seem to get it anymore. And I do feel like you're right. Like I've been saying this for a while. Lord of the Rings was 20 years ago. I think Dune is going to be the kicker.
I hope so.
I'm excited by the potential for Dune.
I mentioned I read it in high school. I enjoyed it, although I found it a little bloated. The book, I mean, I own it. It's one of my favorite, sci-fi novels. But I was worried because Denis Villeneuve, I was not a fan of Blade Runner 2049 at all. and his tendency in that movie to drag shit out was just like, I don't see this guy you have a bloated book and a bloated director. I'm worried. But I saw your review and you seem to come away with it relatively positively.
Yeah, absolutely. And I will have to rewatch it. I really have to do that because I had read the script and I was colored by the script. I was expecting an adaptation of the script and I didn't get that. What you have instead is a really, really stripped down version of the surface layer story of the first half of the book. Really stripped down, and it's so stripped down that it is comprehensible to the audience. There's no question who's that, what's going on here, it's too complicated. None of that. What I've heard more and more people say is, no, it's crystal clear what's going on, because they stripped it down so much. And since they stripped it down so much, Denis Villeneuve had plenty of time to be every bit as excessive as he was in Blade Runner 2049.
Oh dear!
But it's with very pretty pictures, and followed by epic score. And by score, I mean industrial sound effects, because I was personally very disappointed by the score.
Is that another Hans Zimmer, or is
yes.
it somebody else?
Yeah, no, it's Hans Zimmer.
Yeah,
it's literally Hans Zimmer. And Hans Zimmer, he has given up this thing with like melodies like that's old, that's boring. You don't need melodies. You just need industrial noise.
Just loud, digitized French horn farts.
I tried listening to the soundtrack. It's actually on YouTube, officially released.
What did you think about it, Tom?
I got through about 2 minutes of.
You're like,
little something in the background. Oh, and then there was and shit like that. Like, yeah, it was all drums and shit. It was like,
I said,
are we getting a melody here at any point? Like,
no, you're not going to get a melody.
I kind of figured that's
at any point whatsoever. I mean, there's one point where you come close to a melody, but just at one point. Yeah. But again, I will say that
he rips off Dark Side of the Moon for about 5 seconds. Yeah.
yeah.
You just get boom, boom.
Yeah, you have that. But I will say that industrial noise, it does kind of fit them. So I'm not ripping on it. It's something that unless you place your mind on it, you're not going to pay attention to. I don't think it's going to detract from the experience.
Right.
The only reason I even noticed.
Put it this way. Put it this way. We're talking Pulp. How about another Pulp character, James Bond? We all like GoldenEye, right? Total shit soundtrack, but GoldenEye's a great movie anyway.
Oh yeah, and a great character.
Yeah,
with Francisco Scaramanga.
No, GoldenEye, not Man with the
Sorry, GoldenEye. Oh, I was thinking of Man with the Golden Gun. Yeah, GoldenEye was brilliant. That was the first Bond movie I saw in a theater. That was an amazing experience.
Yeah, right. Bad soundtrack on that movie, though. It was like weird Casio keyboard stuff. Sounded like a video game soundtrack, actually. That's probably why it works so well on Nintendo 64.
But speaking of another cult pulp character, have you seen Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings yet?
I've not, and I'm a big Shang-Chi fan, the comic character. I mean, so I'm absolutely gonna. I'm baffled by how well it's done. Now, granted, it's still like the third lowest Marvel opening ever.
Yeah, I don't think it's going to cross 400 million, but yeah.
Yeah, you know what I mean? Like, I think it's going to do well. It's doing way better than I thought. You know,
it is doing pretty decent all in all.
And I am a Shang-Chi fan, but the thing is, it didn't really remind me much of the character of Shang-Chi that I know.
Oh no, screw the character Shang-Chi. Like, I've seen the movie and Shang-Chi from the comics. Oh, he ain't here. But the part of the movie that I liked is the Fu Manchu bit of the movie. Because I have to say that although Marvel have tried to distance themselves as much as they can, the best part of this movie is the Fu Manchu bit. And I think that this was a really, really good Fu Manchu reboot. And it's a Fu Manchu movie I'd like to see in full. And I look forward to hearing your take on this iteration of Fu Manchu. who Marvel are desperate for everyone to not think is Fu
of course,
Manchu,
it's the Mandalorian.
although it totally
I'm
forgets.
excited. Yeah, I'm excited because I was afraid they would totally do away with the Fu Manchu and just replace him with the Mandarin.
Well,
like
he kind of
they
is.
did, but
He's
they
faux Manchu.
but he's so ingrained into the story that they can't do it completely. So they can say that, yeah, this is the Mandarin. His real name is Wen Wu, and in no way, shape, or form do they mention Fu Manchu. Because they're like no, we don't own the rights to Fu Manchu. This isn't Fu Manchu. This is Wenwu. This is the Mandarin. This isn't Fu Manchu. But you can totally tell the inspiration there anyway.
Yeah, I'm interested to see it because that's
Oh my god, there we have it. There's like rabbit chicken, or as I like to call him, headless Snarf.
Well, it was almost like he was made for eating. He's got 6 legs, 4 wings, no head, no ass.
Buddy, it's China. Everything was made for eating.
Yeah. Well, we made it's kind of an ongoing joke with us.
Right.
We even have a commercial for it. But anyway.
Wow.
Yeah, rabbit chicken taco. Yeah, that's brilliant.
Yeah.
But yeah,
I'm excited about that.
Code from him too.
Comes back to Pulp all over again with Fu Manchu. Jesus Christ.
I hope it's good, but I've heard so many mixed things on it. I was going to go see it opening weekend, but honestly, talking about Dune and Shang-Chi, Disney's probably lucky that Warner has not released Dune yet, because as well as it performed this last weekend, if they'd have dropped it in the US too, it would have killed any momentum Shang-Chi had, because it'll probably limp towards 400 million when it's all said and done, barely making a profit, if that. So it'll be they'll still tote it as a triumphant success, but it really isn't. Let's be real.
I mean, that's the thing I'm saying. I'm the target demographic. I've been reading Shang-Chi for years. He's an awesome character in the comics. Really cool. He's just Bruce Lee. He's just Marvel Bruce Lee, but with Fu Manchu as his dad and a whole Pulp backstory that's really cool. All that stuff is really awesome, and he's the best martial artist in the Marvel universe as well. In the comics, I mean. By far, like him and Iron Fist, it's like right there, right? So I'm gonna see it at some point. But you saying that they have the Fu Manchu vibe, at least, I'm stoked. I'm a little bit more stoked.
It's not the vibe of the traditional Fu Manchu, but the influence is kind of like there. It's certainly enough that I recognize it. And if this the first part of the movie dealing with him, if that was like a full-on Fu Manchu reboot, I'd be on board with it.
But let's be real. The real star is Rabbit Chicken here. So
Right. Well, it gives me hope that we can get a proper Shiwan Khan if we ever get another Shadow movie at some point. Although John Lone was good in the original movie.
Yeah. Indeed.
I mean, I was looking forward to it, but we'll see. I'll wait till it's only got less than 20 some days before it's on Disney Plus now. So.
Oh yeah, probably
the 45-day window. So
right. So I may wait for it to come
at this point.
Yeah, right. I don't feel like getting the pinko pox just to see a shitty Marvel.
For Dune, it might be worth it.
Right. For Dune, fine. I'll get lupus. I don't give a shit.
I'll get those pustule things that are on Baron Harkonnen's face in the Lynch version for that.
Right. Whatever that shit on Morgan Freeman's cheeks is, I'll get that.
I think those are called freckles.
Did God paint you? Love that movie, by the way.
Yeah, that is my favorite Robin Hood.
Me too. American accent and all. I don't give a shit.
Yeah, I don't mind because it's such a great movie.
Even the Brian
I forget the name of the director right now, but he later directed The Count of Monte Cristo. Oh. And in my opinion, his Count of Monte Cristo is the definitive live-action version of that story. And it's significantly changed from the novel. But I will say, in terms of taking a really big and honestly kind of boring novel and making a movie adaptation of it, in giving it an action-packed script that kind of stays true to the original nonetheless, can't be bettered.
Yeah.
It's one of the best novel to script adaptations I've
so it's
seen.
It's like reverse Hobbit then.
Yeah. Yes, it is. It's reverse Hobbit.
Well, at least with the Hobbit, there's enough there that you could recut it down to what's in the book, and that's it, probably for the most part. But I'm sure the chat has a lot to say about this stuff. We should probably see what they're talking about.
Yeah, we should see.
We
what
left
the
off
chat
with
has to say.
I believe was the last.
And we have a couple of super chats here as well. And I just said we're not going to forget a single one of them here. So let's go through a couple before we move on here.
Is where we left off, I believe.
Sent us a diamond super sticker, so thanks for that. Stephen Otten said, "Hail, Andre, Tom, Razorfist, Wrenches, and chat."
Hail.
And hail Stephen Otten for always including everyone.
Yeah, and this just come across, and I heard about this the other day, but it's actually happening now. Paramount and Showtime are bundling their service. That's how much a success Paramount Plus is.
Yeah,
how long have I been saying? I've been saying this for years. It's all circling back around. We fled cable so that we could get to these streaming services that had everything. And then the streaming services all fractured into separate things. And I'm telling you, as God is my witness, they will all eventually be bundled into massive Uber services and will basically be buying cable all over again.
You were kind of right.
Except it'll be on the internet. That's where we're heading.
I said the same thing because Amazon was kind of in that. They were kind of doing that. Like they were conglomerating all of the streaming services, but now like HBO Max walked away from them.
Yep.
So you're starting to see a refracturing again. It's kind of like it's a never ending thing. I think we're going to be dealing with this for the next few years until cable is completely dead and we have no choice. Yeah, but again, most people have already shown what they're going to do. They're going to keep like Amazon and Netflix or Disney, and then they're just going to hop around the other ones because there was an article that was basically saying that that's what people are doing already, and that's what I predicted was going to happen because there's no way somebody can afford 17 fucking streaming services when it's going to cost you 3 times what your cable bill already was.
Which is why I'm saying I think eventually you're going to get the Comcast of internet streaming services. Eventually you're going to get somebody who cuts a big deal with Netflix, a big deal with Amazon, a big deal with whatever, and they'll gobble. Or maybe you'll end up with 2 different companies. One will have Netflix and one will have Amazon, and then they'll have a bunch of the other ones.
That's kind of we're seeing.
Yeah, you'll get MLB and all the sports stuff, and you'll get everything on. I'm certain that's where we're heading.
Well, that's kind of when it's going to be over with, and we're already starting to see that because my dad was griping the other day that he had to hook up a laptop to his TV so he could watch the Packer game on YouTube. And I'm like, yep. As soon as they move the sports off the network television, that's when the end has happened. Like that's when it's done. We're moving on, kids.
Baseball's already doing the Facebook games. Yeah, totally.
Yeah. And then before we move on with the super chats, I have to highlight a comment here for 2 reasons, actually. Razorfist, do you want to read this one?
Odysseus Jones says they should have had Doug Mensch write the script for Shang-Chi. He really made the character, and that's factual.
I heard he's a real mensch.
Really?
Yeah. Is that how you pronounce it? Doug Mensch?
Well, some people it's Munch. You know, it depends how they decide.
If my name was that, I would be Mensch because
Right. Why wouldn't you be?
Okay. No, the reason I wonder is because I've only seen it written. I've never heard it pronounced. I was like thinking, is it Mensch, Munch, Munch? How do you say that?
Sometimes it's Munch, depending on the ethnicity or whatever. But
yeah, I also have to say that he is actually one that wrote a really good run on Conan the Barbarian 2 in that time span when Roy Thomas wasn't writing it. His run was so good that Roy Thomas actually followed up and referenced his run while he ignored pretty much all others when he came back to the title.
He's kind of known nowadays more for Moon Knight than anything, but he's a big time creator for years and years and years.
Yeah. So. Are you looking forward to Moonlight on Disney Plus?
No.
Well, that was easy.
I like Moon Knight, but no, absolutely not. On Disney Plus, no, blow it at your ass. And before we get a season 4 of Daredevil, really? Yeah, sit on it and spin, Disney.
I mean, as far as the character goes, I'm not really aware of him all that much other than what we've kind of reported on him, but I'm sick of seeing Oscar Isaacs and everything. It's like he's the new Idris Elba. He's fucking everywhere. Like, there's nothing he's not. He's even the voice of Gomez in the Addams Family cartoons, for Pete's sake. I mean, he's in everything. I think it's time we got a little break from Oscar. He's a good actor and all, but
I don't know.
All right, moving on with the super
or at least
chats.
he's a better actor than Jai Courtney, I guess.
Yeah. Okia Native says for $2, Bester won the inaugural Hugo Award. He was good.
Yeah, and I think he won the Hugo Award for that story, if I remember correctly. The Star's My Destination.
Yeah. And Berserk Shirt Bear says for $2, how do you guys feel about Kull? He's interesting. Razorfist, what do you feel about Kull?
We talked all about him.
But yeah.
He's proto Conan. He's got rougher edges, from what I understand, but his stories are a little simpler, but also maybe a little more brutal in some ways than some of the Conan stuff.
Yeah, as for me, I feel that he is a much less interesting character himself.
Yes.
But the stories around him are what's interesting. Case in point, the Shadow Kingdom. But also the other Kull stories, they are much more meta stories, more philosophical in a sense. Mm-hmm. So there's more experimentation done with the world around Kull than with Kull himself. So the Kull stories are interesting for the stories more so than for the character, who honestly is he's more depressed and less testosterone-driven Conan.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he's got, obviously, with the rewriting that takes place, which is just, Pulp in general does that a lot. You know, I guess some of the different elements from even other characters creep into other stories all the time in Robert E. Howard stuff. It happens in all characters from that period.
And then Golgo13's Anime 101 says for $1.99, Razor, spin and say, F you, I was right.
Now, I'll knock over my my microphone if I do that, so sorry.
Well, we actually have a meme for that that can help you with that.
Oh shit!
It's not you, but it's still a pretty cool one. It's one I use quite often because I tend to have a tendency to be right about things too, and so does Andre. So we like to use this one.
I fucking knew it! Oh!
I'm not sure about that last noise, but okay. It kind of sounded like Christian Bale during that rant on the set of Canada.
We're fucking. You ever seen that, The Hateful Eight?
Oh, good.
Oh yeah. Oh, good for you. Yeah,
that was a good one. And then we have Gran Wasu 42, who says for €5, nice topic and a great guest for that. Yes, indeed. Razorfist is the person to talk all things Pulp, Robert E. Howard, and especially Solomon Kane with. So
I wish
very happy to have you
here. The cover of my next book is already done, and it's very Conan Frazetta-esque.
Oh, nice. I can't wait to see that.
It's right behind me, and I can't show you because it's not... the book isn't...
Oh, yeah. Well, we look forward to seeing it when you can show it and talk it up when it comes to promoting. You have to come back so we can talk about it then.
Yeah, I got it framed and everything, and I can't show it off. It's driving me crazy. I got the biggest case of blue balls ever.
The release will come. And Will Robinson sent us 2 super chats, one blank, one for $1.99, and then for $5. I would love to see a James Wan directed Pigeons from Hell. Yeah, that would be something. He's the director for that. I have to say that would be spectacular.
Have you seen?
I don't know what the hell
Fuck You movie yet? Malignant or whatever. I haven't seen it yet, but
I have not seen it yet. No.
But I guess I heard it's his big fuck you movie. Like it was the movie that Warner let him made or not Warner, but Universal let him make because or Warner let him make it, but it was because of Aquaman. That's what it was. Yeah, because he made him so much money with Aquaman. It was his fuck you money movie.
That movie being successful still blows my mind.
Yeah, right. Well, it doesn't blow my mind. So you got Jason Momoa. That's all it needed. The women came a flocking.
Yeah, the dude from Baywatch Hawaii. Fucking,
they love him. They love him.
And then 1 week, sorry, can't bring up here. Kevin Sorbo Kull movie, Razorfist. What say you?
I haven't seen it. I've had it recommended to me, but I haven't seen it. No, I like Kevin Sorbo on Twitter, but I don't.
I haven't seen it either, but I've heard mixed. Have you seen it, Andre?
I'm doing a retrospective on it before long.
Yeah, I was gonna say I thought you had.
As part of the Conan series.
Yeah.
It's actually a really interesting story behind that movie. As for the movie itself, no, it's Red Sonja all over again.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen the reviews for it, and it's been pretty roundly panned, but that doesn't mean much. I know a lot of movies that I like that were panned.
Another one we can bring up on screen here. Mad Leprechaun says, on your subject of ripped off characters, could it be considered that Solomon Kane is a ripoff of Reverend Dr. Sin?
I don't know who that is.
That's the first ever, yeah.
Yeah, from what I understand, Robert E. Howard's inspiration for Solomon Kane was he started from reading about sword fighters and fencers, like swashbucklers and whatnot. That was where it came from. Like, he was reading about the discipline of dedicated fencers and sword fighters. So I would think, in terms of vibe, I've always gotten a Count of Monte Cristo kind of vibe from Solomon Kane, a little bit in some ways. But that's, from what I understand, that's where he came from. And then he got into the whole Puritan thing and whatnot, but that's almost more so window dressing. Once he hit on that, though, then the character kind of had a drive.
I can kind of see the character came out in 1915. I can kind of see some of the possible inspiration for sure, especially in the design and.
I mean, here's the thing: how many different ways are there to draw a Puritan guy?
That's like the thing. I don't buy that there was any kind of influence at all, because as a general thing, Howard didn't rip off other characters. He created his own. Or he might have had many literally influences.
Yeah,
but he generally didn't do any rip-offs. He created wholly original characters, and when he ripped something off, he ripped off his own characters. Like, for instance, how he ripped off Kull in making Conan.
Right. Or absolutely.
I mean, I can see some similarities here, but
so I think that most of the similarities. Could there be some? I cannot conclusively say that there wasn't. But as you pointed out, Razorfist, you have some very known references. We know what Puritans looked like, and Solomon Kane, he was dressed like a Puritan. Of course, you have like a more romantic get-up with like more black and like more the vibe that you've seen in the movies and stuff. But as originally conceived, he just looked like a regular Puritan.
Regular Puritan, Quaker, whatever. In fact, the way that Robert E. Howard describes him is not very detailed. It's like, you know how Robert E. Howard describes people. He doesn't sit there like a lot of modern hacky writers or fan fiction writers do and go, and he had purple buckles on his shoes, and the buckles came to a point, and then his gloves were fingerless, and blah, 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 right? It doesn't do that. He wore the dour garb of the Puritan, right? He was built with the savage economy of a wolf. This is how Robert E. Howard describes the character. He doesn't go, and then he had nice blue buckles on his shoes. Not really what he did. So him looking
the fashion sense of a dandy.
Yeah, not really.
No.
And Joey wonders, is Jonah Hex a ripoff of Solomon Kane?
I don't think so.
I don't think so. No,
probably
I don't think
more
so.
Some of the pulp westerns, which was a bit, we didn't talk about it much here, but pulp westerns were huge at one time. In fact, that's arguably where pulp comes from, is from the dime novels featuring Wild Bill Hickok and, you know, the fictionalized accounts of Wild Bill Hickok's life that happened, you know, near the end of the 19th century. That whole dime novel phenomenon that happened during Wild Bill Hickok's lifetime. He's literally reading these BS stories about his life as he's alive. You know what I mean? And that's kind of where pulp heroes come from a little bit. So yeah, I would think he's more so inspired by some of that stuff.
Yeah. And then moving on with the super chats, we have Elijah Snow, who says for $9.99, hail to Midnight's Edge and the Racer Force. Please check out the Shadowcast for more pulp action. Find the unabridged Razorfist collection, including Deaths of DS9 and Metal Mythos, at unauthorized.tv. I'm going to put that. I'm going to put that in the comments right here.
Well, thank you. I didn't pay you for that product placement, but thank you.
Yeah, no, but this is what we do for our friends. No payment is necessary.
I do the Shadowcast. That's a podcast all about the Shadow. That's it. It's just about him. So I've been going through a lot of the pulp stories.
Brilliant. And then we have from Alexander Ferus, who says for $6.66. This is awesome. Yes, indeed. Well, thank you.
Godspeed. I hope we're inculcating some people into the pulpit of pulp.
Yeah. And Kung Fu Hot Dog says for £5. Hail Midnight's Edge. Andre, you mentioned some time ago that Robert Rodriguez was supposed to direct a Conan reboot. Do you know who would have played the role? And yes, I do. That would have been Arnold Schwarzenegger, because Robert Rodriguez was teaming up with John Milius to direct King Conan, Crown of Iron, for the time when Milius, he initially wanted to direct, but then he kind of like, maybe I'll just produce. And then it was Robert Rodriguez who was the one who would be directing with the Milius producing. So it would have been Schwarzenegger.
That reminds me, speaking of Arnold Schwarzenegger, pulp character we didn't talk about, Doc Savage. Very popular at one time.
Yeah, you brought him up once, but yeah, before you jump to Doc Savage, I just want to selflessly plug again. When we get to it, when Andre's voice is up to it, our next planned script read is King Conan, just so you know. But yes, Doc Savage, you were saying.
No, I had just heard today, and this is the first time I had heard it, that apparently there was that Arnold was almost Doc Savage at one point.
Yeah, I think I heard that too, yeah.
I had no idea. They made a Doc Savage movie in the 70s. I had no idea that he was in the running for that. And then they almost made one. The Rock had literally signed on to do Doc Savage.
Yeah, that one's been in development hell for a while.
Yeah.
For like the last couple of years, I think, actually. But yeah.
And that's
been long in gestation.
Yeah. Sadly. He's perfect. That would have been perfect casting, too. It's unfortunate that went by the wayside.
I think I heard last there was a plausible series in the works, but I don't know how.
That has been confirmed. Condé Nast are working on that with Amazon. That's the idea. And if they're working on Doc Savage with Amazon, chances are the Shadow's not far behind.
Fingers crossed for that, and fingers crossed for no deconstruction.
Sure.
Well, unfortunately, they just did that with the Shadow. I just reviewed James Patterson. The author, the fucking, what's the detective he does? Alex Cross, those novels.
Sounds familiar.
Yeah, now he's just a hack factory. He's like Tom Clancy. He hires a bunch of other people to write his novels for him. But anyways, he just did a Shadow reboot in prose form, and it was virulent ass cancer. It was terrible. It was absolutely awful. I reviewed it. If you want to feel the pain, go watch that on the Shadowcast. It was very woke. Well, it wasn't super woke. There was definitely some wokeness to it, but sadly, and it was the worst part about it is it was supposed to be like setting the table for a possible movie or TV show or something. And Christ, if they base anything on this turd of a book, forget about it. It just came out like a month and a half ago. It's terrible.
Well, that's the problem with a lot of these modern takes on stuff too, is they'll try to go off of one of the more modern versions, and it's just like, no, don't.
Yeah.
Anyway, super chats, Andre. We had a few more.
Yes, we have one we can bring up here. Manowar 665, neighbor of the beast, says for $6.65. So that's basically what you did there. Saw Sorbo Kull in theaters, even own the DVD. Other than for Tia Career, totally skippable.
There you go.
Screw that. I'll just watch Showdown in Little Tokyo for the 100th time.
Yeah, but I saw some people give it love in the chat. World of Conan said about it. I like the Kull movie. Is it brilliant? No, but it's good fun with a great soundtrack and Zorro. So yeah, I'll rewatch it for my not too far away retrospective on it. But I just have to do Red Sonja
AKA,
first.
that means I gotta watch it too.
So yeah, you get to see it as well, and I remember it as Red Sonja level. But yeah, we shall see. We shall see how it holds up.
I enjoyed Red Sonja. I personally enjoyed the movie when I watched it. It was total dick cheese.
You want to do this retrospective instead of me? You're most welcome to.
I mean, here's the funny thing is I have the digital copy of Red Sonja because it's never been released on Blu-ray in the US. And I haven't watched it yet. No.
You want it? Because it's like dirt cheap over here.
Maybe. I don't. Here's the thing. When I was a kid, I loved the shit out of it, right? But I have not watched it since I was like 6, 7 years old. And I'm afraid to watch it now because I know the baggage that movie has. And as a kid, I didn't see it as that. I just saw it as this badass sword movie with this little kid who could kick ass, you know, and Ernie Reyes Jr.
Right.
And shit like that. So I was just like, whatever into that. That's all I remember from the movie is very vague like images and stuff. So I've had it sitting there and I've been afraid to watch it because I bought it like 2 years ago when we started doing the Conan retrospectives, and I just kind of sat on it. So yeah.
And Erik Runge Madsen has what I think is maybe the best review of the Kull movie so far.
That's kind of what I was thinking.
An expensive Hercules episode with more murder. Yeah, that sounds about
so
right.
like the 90s Conan show.
I was just like, why didn't they just make Hercules the movie? That's kind of what this looks like. It's
well,
like,
that's kind of like what it became when they got Kevin Sorbo.
That's what I mean. So yeah. But anyhow, moving on with super chats. I know we
moving on with super chats, and again, these are then classic super chats that I can no longer bring up on screen. I'm just gonna have to listen here. Volcanicus Rex wonders for $5. Do you gents think that James Purefoy had a good take on Kane in a rather mediocre film, or did his portrayal not fit the character that well? And yeah, I believe we answered this one pretty good already, but in case you didn't see that, Razorfist, how well does James Purefoy fit Solomon Kane?
He's perfect. He's absolutely perfect. Really, it's just parts of the script that let him down. And I don't think it's a mediocre film at all. But it isn't a traditionally awesome film in the sense that, like, I can't wait for this part or that part. It's more so about, like, the world that they created. Like, I love the atmosphere of the movie. I can't believe it's like a small budget movie because there are shots in this movie that just look like $1 million. They look fantastic. The atmosphere of it, the kind of, the way they constructed a world where basically all of the superstitions from the Crucible are real, right? Where did you make compact with the devil, right? Like that whole thing is legit. And that's what I love about it. They really, really created a pretty cool looking world. And that's the main thing that I dig about him. But yeah, James Purefoy is definitely the highlight.
Yeah, I agree completely with that. And then we have Ija Gobayan, who says for €10, I think it is fantastic that Howard's work is so influential to modern fantasy and culture, and not a lot of people know that. If I hear my friends talk about subculture, I see the links to Howard and his work. And yes, indeed, like he's really influential, not just directly, but indirectly, because many of the authors that he inspired, their work in turn turned out to be influential on many of our modern things. But like it's Conan, like the barbarian trope we have is literally Conan.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, any game that has any RPG or whatever that you play that has a barbarian class, they're always going to look like Conan. It's always.
Tom, speaking of that, you have to bring up the Rastan game covers.
Oh yes,
Wait till you see this.
Rastan.
Rastan, yeah.
Are you talking about the one that looks like Solomon Kane?
No. This is the one that's literally a paint over of Conan.
Oh, let me see if I can find him. Shit.
Rastan, Rastan. That was a game that actually started out as a Conan game, and then they just decided, hey, you know what? What if we just change the name and we make the game exactly as we were going to and keep everything else? We just don't license the name Conan. How about that?
R-A-S.
Rastan.
T-A. Okay, yeah.
I mean, what's the one I'm thinking of? Like, there were a number of them that were like thinly video game covers.
Yeah, there was a couple. Yeah.
Yeah, look at this one. There we go.
Oh,
I mean,
totally.
that's literally a paint over of a cover from Savage Sword of Conan, and that's done Rastan.
That's great.
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the ones you're thinking of is Golden Axe.
Oh, yes. Thank you. Golden Axe, definitely.
Tom, bring up Golden Axe. And a beautiful painted artwork by I believe it's Luis Royo, who also did quite a few covers for Savage Sword of Conan, who also did the covers for the Golden Axe games, at least the first two of them.
Beautiful. Love it.
Yeah, now that's the
There's
best
the
one.
one.
And yeah, there's the one. Can you make it bigger, Tom? Because there you even have like the Conan ripoff there front and center.
Yeah, totally. And then the vague Red Sonja ripoff too. There.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Right? There's that one record album too, and I can't think of what one it was that ripped off the Frazetta Conan 2 thing.
Oh, do you mean Meatloaf? Backed Out of Hell?
No. But that one is very Frazetta-esque. But
oh, dude, a bunch of them.
No, but there was one that actually ripped off that one art. Let me see if I can find it here.
Like every Man-O-War cover.
Or it was a movie or something like that. I can't remember which, but it was one of the more famous photos, and I saw it like right away. And I'm like, I know
that. The painting earlier of the guys in the snow. What is that? Frost Giants, or what the hell is that called? Anyways,
yeah, that's a Frost Giant's daughter.
Yeah, which by the way is adapted here in the Sumerian, the French comic, which is much better than the Marvel comic right now. But anyways, yeah, the painting there, the Frazetta painting, there's several metal bands from like the 70s.
Yeah.
There's at least one's, what was it? Molly Hatchet used it. And then there's a couple of other like American metal bands and whatnot that use that exact cover art illegally, of course.
Yeah. Yeah, I think this is the one you're talking about.
Yes.
There you go.
Yes.
That's the one. That's the Frost Giant's daughter. That's the cover for the Lancer book.
Yeah.
And I can't find the one I was talking about, but yeah, I see it all the time. You know, it's like constantly anymore. It's like
my favorite Frazetta Conan illustration, incidentally, is the one with the giant snake and he's chained up and shit from behind. That one's freaking brilliant.
Yeah, that's the Scarlet Citadel.
Yes,
I've got so many of them here that I'm like going through like tons of pictures and stuff.
Yeah.
So.
And speaking of other video game ripoffs, the one that you really should play if you haven't already is Shakan the Forever Man, aka Solomon Kane, the Sega Mega Drive
game. Yeah, totally, man.
Starring not Solomon Kane. Tom, can you bring that up?
Oh, better yet,
Shakan the Forever Man.
Yeah, I had that one before when you. Let's see if I can find it again.
Better yet, take a look at the cover for Grim Dawn from a couple of years ago.
Let's see. I'll see if I can find it here. I know I just had it too.
Meanwhile, Golgo13's Anime 101 says Vampire Hunter D looks like Solomon Kane also. And yeah, this
this
is true. This is absolutely true.
Robert E. Howard.
Robert E. Howard, you were saying?
Oh, Howard has been an influence on anime big time. What is this?
That's a motion poster from the Brazilian Conan and Robert E. Howard forum.
Very cool.
Yeah. Cool indeed. And then also Rambam 3000 says, in the Kull movie, Tia Carrere played a character from the Conan Hour of the Dragon story, Akivasha the Vampire, redone as a sorceress. And yes, this has to do with how that movie actually started out as a Conan movie. And it started out as the script for Hour of the Dragon.
Actually, would have been quicker for me to just look for it. What was it called again?
Shakan, the Forever Man.
Yeah.
Chakan.
I had it here, but I'm like, fuck, by the time I find it.
No, I've totally seen it. And it's not alone, too. There's a couple other video game covers that are very Solomon Kane.
Yeah, but here it's not just a cover, it's a gameplay and everything that's complete Solomon Kane.
And obviously,
good game too.
Yep, there you go. And then obviously the big old ripoff nowadays that's really ubiquitous in video games and tabletop gaming and everything is the Inquisitors from Warhammer are just straight up. But Warhammer is just a big bag of stolen shit anyways.
Oh, here's a good Solomon Kane one. And of course, right afterwards, I find the cover, but yeah. There's an old Solomon one.
Yeah, that's Dark Horse. Thanks to whom we have much of these stories. And there's the Del Rey edition.
Yeah.
And all of this is thanks to Fredrik Malmberg. We wouldn't have a single one of these things without Fredrik Malmberg. I know there's some people that like to give him a hard time.
I was looking for that one earlier too.
Stuff, but let's not even bring that off the screen.
No, I know, but when you guys were talking about it, I couldn't find it. I'm like, fuck it.
You just tell us to take Kate Beckinsale and a bustier off the screen. Excuse me, sir. Pardon me, sir.
Well, you can keep the image. Just keep the movie to yourself.
Right. That's for daddy.
Yeah.
Oh, that's the tabletop game.
Yep.
There we go.
I think I had this from last time you were talking about it. Yeah.
Myself and Terengel played live on. We actually streamed like a live demo of it, and we played through the story. Oh, God, which one was it? The Rattle of Bones. The Robert E. Howard story, Rattle of Bones, where Solomon Kane stays in an inn and they hear some rattling in a room, and it turns out that this sorcerer had been killed and chained up in this room and died, and his bones reanimate and kill this criminal guy. It's really cool, but the way the game works is basically the way that you play it changes the story. So it goes all different ways. It's great. It's like playing a choose your own adventure mixed with like a tabletop game. Highly recommend it. It's a lot of fun.
And then we got another super chat we can bring up on here. Niels Adair says Pigeons from Hell was adapted for a TV show Thriller in 1961. You can watch it on YouTube.
Yes, indeed it was.
And then we also had one from the Grizzly, who's also a new member, it looks like. Thank you for that as well. Says, I really like Conan as a character. He's my favorite Robert E. Howard IP. I'm worried that if we get a new movie, it will make the 2003 one look like the original movie. God, I'm so worried for any masculine character. Andre, obviously, we have
nothing is certain until cameras are rolling. However, the beauty here is that much of what has happened with the deconstruction and everything like that going on with other properties is because they have to diversify, wokeify, stuff like that. With Conan, that's not so much a challenge, because it's just one character. It's one character you have to get right, and then he has a revolving set of supporting characters that are going to change from location to location.
Right.
So all of the quotas and everything that needs to be done, in principle, it can be done on the supporting characters for that episode or for that storyline covering those episodes. So that alone is actually one way to bypass anything there. On top of that, we know that Amazon really wanted to make some significant changes, and it's no longer with Amazon. So I'm not going to sit here and say that, oh, don't worry, everything is guaranteed to be fine. Because that we can't be certain of, but I will say that so far, so good. There is no reason as of this moment to think that Conan in any way is going to be compromised. And if you even look at the 2011 movie, granted that movie has flaws, but in terms of like how masculine, brutal Conan was, those weren't among them.
I think it needs to be pointed out, though, that obviously some impasse had to, like, again, there's things that we can't really talk about, but we do know this much. They must have come to some kind of impasse at Amazon that they could not overcome or compromise on, that, you know, the whole thing fell apart there, and that they're over at Netflix. I got to say there's got to be a reason for that. So I have that much faith that it at least will hopefully be decent enough, and they won't push too much of the influence onto it. I mean, there's ways they can get through it, and I think they'll be all right.
Yeah, I think we'll be fine here. So I wouldn't be too worried about that. And then we have the Mad Leprechaun, who says an obvious reference to Solomon Kane can be seen in the 2000 AD characters Defoe. P.S. You missed my first super chat. No, we haven't missed it. We just haven't gotten to it yet. We still have a catalog of
we're getting there.
Chats, and we haven't gotten it. And this one we already got.
We did? Okay.
Yeah, we did. And then I'm going to go back to the classics, see if we can't find the Mad Leprechaun in there. Next,
did we get this one from Rambam as well, since we can get it on screen?
Let me see which one it is, because I had to go away from the
Kull movie. Tia Carrere played the character from Conan.
Yes, we had.
Okay.
Yeah, we got that
one. Just making sure. All right. So back to classics. The next one then is Lofty Pixels, who says for $4.99, love this conversation. Did you see what Lashana Lynch said about Bond fans? So condescending and delusional. I tagged you on the Bird app. I haven't seen it yet, but I'm pretty sure it's going to be a topic for tomorrow's Midnight Edge in the morning.
Right. We could have gone off on a whole tangent about Bond, because he's technically kind of a 60s or 50s pulp character, and he's inspired by the work of Raymond Chandler and other stuff that was actual pulp.
Yeah,
but, I think we can all.
We could, but we're not going to, because we have many more or a few more super chats to go through here. And Uncle Brat says for $10. So far, I have disagreed with most statements made. I have made a study of Howard since the early 70s and have purchased copies of every Weird Tales issues that Howard was included. More research. And then I would imagine that's a statement to be followed up. Let's see. This was the Uncle Brett. And I don't see anything else. So if there's a part 2 to that statement, because it looks to have been, then do let us know in the comments what more you were saying, because we only have the first part here. It says more research, and then it just ends. So do follow up on what you were saying there. Meanwhile,
I'd be curious what you guys have been wrong on, because if there's anybody I would know who I'd go to first and foremost when it comes to Howard, it'd be you guys. That's why I helped put this together today. It was like, yeah. So, but clearly, definitely reach out to Andre and let him know what you think if you have to expand on that much more.
And then Son of the D says for 750 Icelandic krona. I got the Elric Stormbringer by P. Craig Russell. The art and coloring look great. Beautiful. But is it worth reading the rest of Russell's Elric comics?
Oh, absolutely. And here's the great thing about those. And they're not all illustrated by Russell, by the way. The first one, he shares art duties with another guy who has a similar art style, actually, which is really good. And the same goes for the second one. P. Craig Russell himself only did the third and also the final volume, Stormbringer. So he did The Dreaming City and he did Stormbringer. Those are the two that he did. And but the other ones are good too. The cool thing about him is they're written by, his name came up yet again, Roy Thomas. And he was very true to Michael Moorcock's original source material. And so these are direct, like quote for quote, panel for panel, line for line adaptations of Elric and Melda Benet. So it literally goes through the whole saga. So if you want to kind of read Elric without reading the books and just have it in comic form, that's the way to do it. Those collections. And I think they're in hardcover form. They're available. They're about to release the last one, which is Bane of the Black Sword from Titan Comics, I believe. And it's called the Michael Moorcock Collection, I believe. So it's all Elric, and they're all named the actual names of the books.
Yeah. How good was Roy Thomas, though? when you look at all of the pulp literature that he made available through a whole new generation. And not only that, like the Conan movies wouldn't have happened without Roy Thomas.
Yeah, really. And really, the two Elric adaptations you need to check out if you want to get into the character are, there's a French comic that's going on right now. The final volume of that, it's a quadrilogy, just came out in France. It's going to be translated coming out later this year in a hardcover format. It's actually, the single issues are already out. But that's just called, the first one's called The Ruby Throne. And then the one I just mentioned, which is the Michael Moorcock collection. It's the reprints of the old ones from the 70s and 80s. They're awesome. Absolutely awesome.
Yeah, and then also Stephen Simmons says, given how the Wheel of Time looks and all the changes they are confirmed to be making, I won't whinge too much about Amazon not making Conan stuff. And yeah, we've said this many times before.
Yeah.
Wheel of Time came about because they decided not to proceed
Conan
with
was too problematic.
Exactly, that's exactly right. And this apparently it was Jennifer Salk at Amazon who made that choice, that there was no rescue for Conan. They couldn't work together on it, so it never happened. But
sorry, we wanted
all
Conan,
the attention on the Wheel of Time.
We wanted Conan. We just wanted the non-masculine loincloth-clad barbarian. Jesus,
you mean can't
take a long drag off that hilarity, hookah. Jesus Christ.
No, but really, the reason that she wanted Wheel of Time was that it was like more female-centric to begin with, and it could be done a hell of a lot more female-centric in the adaptation. And that is why they went with it.
I'm seeing them not being able to compromise on Conan being played by an Asian black trans woman.
Right? They're like, but he's not a redhead, so we can't turn him into a black chick. So, gosh, what are we gonna do? I don't.
But now this Red Sonja. Oh, you don't own that character? Shit.
Yes. Oh my God.
Let's not even get into what that's going to happen to that. Hopefully, Robert Rodriguez will take care of it, but I'm just not so sure anymore what's going to happen because they got that new writer on there, and I think
it's already filming. Like, I think it's done filming by now.
Oh, good God, Gertie.
Yeah.
Okay, well, it's over.
So all we can do now is like hope that
this is the one where we're getting the chick from Ant-Man 2, right?
Yes, that's the one. That's the one.
Played the ghost or whatever it was.
Yes, the ghost. Yeah, I forget her name right now. Like she's an attractive woman, but they did the whole thing trope about like if it's a ginger character, then replace with a black actress. They did that. So Red Sonja is now a black actress. So yeah,
her and I said they'll probably end up putting her in an outfit much like this too. I remember saying that.
Yeah, she's not going to have the chainmail. They've been very clear about that to avert the male gaze.
It'll look like something out of the Eternals or this. You watch.
And it'll get 2 viewers and a bunch of awards.
So it's not going to be Red Sonja, but we can still hope that it's going to be a good movie in its own right, and that it can be something to spur Weezy kindle interest in sword and sorcery. Let's just keep our fingers crossed for that, because the movie is happening. It's filming. It's coming. Whether we like it or not, it's happening.
Yeah, we can certainly hope that.
We'll probably have seen it.
I can certainly hope for a solid gold-plated crapper. That doesn't mean it's going to happen.
Yeah. No, hope is not a strategy, but really for that movie, it's all we got. So yeah. And moving on some much more pleasant notes.
Well, Amazon just wasn't happy they couldn't get Conan starring Leslie Jones. That's
right.
Yeah, well, I don't think that was ever going to happen.
I've had enough of all these barbarians up in this motherfucker.
Right.
And then she's just,
But moving on, Drive-By Commenter says for $5, one thing that's always valued about these black-clad pulp heroes is they are testaments to the power of improvisation and problem-solving within limits. Yeah, that's absolutely MacGyvering the surroundings. If anyone invented that, it's like black-clad pulp heroes. And Chris Raposo says for $5 Canadian, such a great conversation here. Learning so much and glad to see some positive conversation today. I'd love to have such positive conversations all the time. Just have to be something that we're happy about, like this.
And that was the
like
motivation.
Literature from the 30s.
Yeah, and then I hope to talk to Razorfist soon and get Quarter Black Garrett in on it too, and talk some Ninja Turtles eventually here too.
Oh, I'd love to. I'd love to. You guys have
Especially
no
now that I
idea.
just put my order in for Last Ronin #4 yesterday.
Oh, it's coming. It's coming, and so am I. I mean, what? No, it. Oh man, that comic has been fantastic.
I know, right?
Looking forward to it.
And something else that was fantastic was apparently a recent script read, because Culture Casino says for $5 our script read was amazing.
It was, yes.
And which script was this?
Oh, the one we did the Batman one.
Oh, right, yeah.
Yeah.
And Hypergiver 2 says for $2, anyone familiar with Casca, the Eternal Warrior?
No.
I'm not.
Nope, doesn't ring a bell. I've heard. Wait, I have seen Eternal Warrior comics. If that's the same character, then yes, I have seen it because I used to work in a comic shop.
It's completely new to me,
Yeah,
so
yeah.
no clue. And then this is probably the one that the Mad Leprechaun was waiting for $5. If there's one thing that should be adapted as a radio series, it's Stephen King's The Dark Tower saga.
They haven't already? I can't believe they haven't at some point, at least on the BBC or something like that. But yeah, you're not wrong there.
Yeah, they're starting to bring the audio dramas back. They did a really good one for Wolverine a few years ago. Now they're doing Batman.
Yeah, I saw that.
A few years ago, I was like, well, people are walking around with iPhones and they have short attention spans. This seems like a natural. This is probably going to come back.
Well,
and sure enough.
When I was driving for work, like, that was the thing is I didn't, you listen to the radio, they say that play the same 10 fucking songs over and over again, so it's like, fuck. So I'd listen to a lot of books on tape. My only complaint is when you have one person doing all the voices, right?
Right.
Like, so to me, I'd prefer it be like a radio play. Like, I've heard great radio plays of, like, of course, the original Hitchhiker's Guide and stuff like that. And Lord of the Rings, they've done some great ones. Star Wars, they've done some great ones. I know recently Andre said the Sandman ones are really good. So yeah, I mean, I would think that'd be really cool if they started doing a little bit more production oriented, like audio books. It'd be really great too. So I'm all on board for that. I love that stuff. That's why we do it. I mean, we kind of got it all together and we put it together and now we're doing it. It's kind of weird, but yeah. Can't wait to do Conan. That's going to be a fun one. So
yeah, good times. And then Kaiju King Gabriel says, would you consider John Carter and Tarzan a part of this list? As for me, oh hell yeah.
Yeah, big time.
Yeah, big time. Absolutely.
And all of the characters that spun off of them too.
Yes.
Genre there.
I mean,
like Carson of Venus and everything.
I mean, basically all the pulp characters that you guys have talked about today, and I mean, I've contributed very little to this conversation, so that's why I say you guys have talked about today are pretty much the foundation for the superheroes, right? Like every single one of them is kind of like the jumping point for Superman and Batman and all these characters that came down the road that were still popular today. So I think that's the important part too to be pointed out. But yeah, definitely.
And I just have to highlight the comment here. Stephen Simmons says, if people are into audio dramas, check out the H.P. Lovecraft Historical Society stuff. A+ all of them. Also, they did a couple of fan movies. And the one really worth checking out is their Call of Cthulhu. They made that as a silent film with the title cards and everything.
Very
as
cool.
if it was made in 1925. That is not... Sorry, 1925. And it looks really authentic and it's amazing. Well worth checking out.
There you go.
And then we have Tom. You have to say the name.
Rod Thunderheart.
And he says, hail Andre, hail Tom, and hail Razorfist. Love the conversation. Funny, I read The Savage Sword of Conan and thought his origin was kind of skewed. And I can actually answer that. The only issues dealing with Conan's origin are the ones written by lesser writers. They weren't written by Roy Thomas, and they weren't written by Chuck Dixon. They were written by the likes of DeMatteis and Bruce Jones and others like them, and their stories just weren't up to par. So as far as I'm concerned, I just ignored those stories. So I don't consider them canon, and neither did Roy Thomas when he came back to the title after like 10 years. So he did like a story where he pretended a few months had passed since the last issue he wrote, like 10 years earlier, and he was like, he had like a scene where Conan says something along the lines of like, these last few months are like dim to me. I'm just gonna sharpen up and carry on as before. So yeah. So that was like the last 10 years. And then Lupu says for 20 Mexican dollars. I'm an hour late. Well, there's always the replay, so don't forget about that.
Yeah, this is not going anywhere.
Yeah, and Kiki Hideout says for another 20 Mexican dollars. Muchas gracias. Sorry. Don't forget censorship due to the woke.
Yeah. Well, hopefully Netflix won't have that problem.
And luckily, we have all of the original stories now in Dark Horse version anyway. So yeah, can't take those away from our shelves. Smith Self said Kevin Sorbo Kull movie. Yeah, we mentioned that a couple of times already. And with that, I think we are caught up here. Just going to do double check, but I think we're caught up.
Cool. So yeah, I want to thank.
We are caught up.
I want to thank Razorfist for his time. As always, it's a pleasure to get to hang out with you and talk about whatever it is we get to talk about, especially stuff like this that we love. And hopefully we can set up something for TMNT soon. Other than that, is there anything going on that you'd like to plug or talk about that you'd like the folks to check out there?
Oh well, hell, I'm gonna get a video out about Pulp Heroes in the next week, hopefully. But I'm already working on it. I just recorded. Hell, if you want to listen to some Pulp, you want to get into it, I just recorded an audiobook of Shadow Story, just a random one I picked off the shelf. It's called Double Z. It's like a serial killer kind of story. It's really cool, actually. But just at random, I decided to record one. So if you're interested in getting into kind of vigilante pulp fiction, go check that out. Sorry, my dog's bugging.
Oh no, dogs are always welcome guests on this channel.
Yep, he's a filthy Italian. All right, so but no, that and at some point here, I'm gonna be getting my next actual pulp out. I already have The Long Moonlight that's available on Amazon if you want to check it out. It's like a sword and sorcery noir, really, is what it is, like a crime story set in a fantasy world. So yeah,
Awesome.
Other than that, thank you for having me on and for discussing the Puritan Avenger and the loincloth model and all of these other wonderful pulp accoutrements.
Anytime, of course, you're always welcome. Mecha J sends in a super chat here real quick and asks, would you guys be down for Conan ever getting an animated series or movie? Oh, I think we all would be. And actually, we've heard that's always a possibility. And that's another reason why Netflix was a great idea for Conan, or at least hopefully a good home for Conan, at least from what Frederick was saying. I do suggest you check out our interviews with him. He gives us a lot of insight on that. But yeah, he brings up the fact that, animated series or animated specials and things of that sort are not out of the realm of possibility. I remember even bringing up, maybe having Schwarzenegger come back and do voice work and stuff like that. He said that's always something he'd be interested in. So yeah, I do suggest you check out our interviews with him for more insight on that. But yeah,
have Schwarzenegger come on screen and say, "Screw your freedom."
Yeah, now unfortunately he's got. I didn't mean to say it like that. Okay, I was just stupid. Yeah. But yeah, no, I definitely think that's in the cards. What do you guys think? Would you be all for some?
I hope so. I'd be all for animated literal adaptations of the Conan stories, like we were supposed to get with the animated Red Nails, where they even did the voice work. They did the audio, so the dubs exist, but the studio ran out before they could finish the animated version. So Ron Perlman was Conan, and he did all of his line recordings and was never released.
Oh wow. That's really sad. I love Conan the Adventurer back in the day, but it's nothing like the books. But it's still a great show.
There you go.
Oh yeah, and also there I didn't even see it, but I happened to answer the question from Man of War 665, Neighborhood of the Beast. Whatever happened to the Red Nails animated film? The studio ran out of funding. Simple as that. The money ran out before it was finished. That's what happened to it.
Yeah. Well, as far as us goes, we've got Midnight's Edge After Dark coming up in a couple of hours. We got Midnight's Edge in the morning, tomorrow morning. I think we're going to have Tom Conkle, but I'm not 100% sure on that yet.
Hell yeah.
Other than that, I know Paulie and Mike and I are supposed to talk about Cry Macho. I don't know when that's going to actually go live. I think we're recording it. So stay tuned for that as well. We all saw the film, and we'll let you know what we thought of that. Check out Razorfist channel, of course, the Rageaholic. And other than that, check out his works and his webpage that we shared the link for earlier for his
My Gay Fireman calendar, now available at all major retailers.
Yes. We love how you hold that hose.
Yes.
And as
That's
Becca
not
J
a hose.
says,
No.
God fucking speed indeed. So Andre, anything you want to add quick before we go?
No, I just want to say thank you to Razorfist for joining us. It's always a pleasure to talk pulp with someone else who truly understands the genre. Always a pleasure.
Yes, sir. Thank you for having me.
All right, kids. So with that, we'll catch you on the flip side. See you tomorrow morning or later on Mead. Take care, everybody.